Welcome to the Week in Sports Cars, an early Week in Sports Cars. We're going up Monday, the day after the conclusion of the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Graham Goodwin, welcome, my friend. We are here with another Marshall Pruett podcast presented by Cooper Tires. Wow. We sure had a race, I think. There were some excellent parts of this race. There were some other parts that left probably more to be desired than I can remember at Le Mans. And so I think somewhere between, yay, positive, everything is awesome, and, not completely sure if that is awesome. I think we're floating in that range. What are your general takeaways before we get into specifics?
Well, let me tell you this. I'm still in Le Mans. Just come back from a walk around the paddock as they break it down with some truly filthy race cars there. Absolutely fantastic. But before that, sat down to actually plan some editorial work I'm going to do here over the next couple of days. And one of them was, it was going to be 10 things that were really good about the 2018 Le Mans 24 Hours and 10 things that actually need to be looked at again. And I couldn't quite get there. And here's the odd thing. The 10 things are reasonably easy. The 10 things that perhaps need to be looked at, I can't get to 10, but I have got 4 or 5 really quite big ones, which means that they're either really difficult to sort out or really simple. And I don't want to be a downer on it. I think there were aspects of the event that were absolutely fantastic. There were some big ticket items that very clearly need to be looked at very carefully. And certainly, I think there are some things that absolutely need to be changed before we get to the next round of the WC at Silverstone, and absolutely before we get to this great race in about 363 days' time. And, you know, bear in mind that the core, if the plan comes together, the core of the grid, we've already seen. There will be probably less difference between the grid for the 24 Hours of Le Mans 2019 and 24 Hours of Le Mans 2018 than any previous year in modern history, principally because it's part of the same season of the FIWC, and that season has 36 full season entries that, at least in theory, are already in the entry for 2019.
Well, that's a definite positive. If we look at, the continuity aspect there, Graham, is definitely a good thing. Let's get into some of the finer points, though. I know my takeaway from the race, and I don't want us to start off with dark clouds and criticism. I do know that I've spoken with a couple of drivers this morning. Looked at a lot of feedback on social media. Just folks, weigh in with your thoughts. And, as I mentioned in the very beginning, we had some wonderful racing, in particular for the latter stages of the podium, I think, in almost every class. What we didn't have, by and large, though, and this is maybe the greater question to start with, Graham, the winners in all 4 classes, I think we predicted more or less. I think you went for the Rebellion for the overall win, but I know that a Toyota was chosen, the 26G drive was chosen, the Pink Pig was chosen, I believe, for GTE Pro, and I think one of the 2 Proton cars, I think the car that we chose on Friday in our pre-race Day at Le Mans episode, I think it might have been the other way around in terms of which car won. Might have even been the same with Toyota, but effectively, the overriding sense that I have is one of sadness that on Friday, without having to make crazy predictions, without having to just go, oh my goodness, I cannot possibly fathom how this race might end up, the victors in all 4 classes, P2 might have been the only one that was a little bit of a guess because it was so hotly contended. I'll strip that one out, but at least LMP1 and both GT classes, it really seemed that unless there was a major malfunction, we knew which team was going to win, and that proved to be the case. So my general, or maybe a little bit more specific takeaway, Graham, is one of It was fun watching Pick the GT car in third place, fighting like heck with the one in fourth, or the one in second fighting with third, or eighth against ninth. But if we're actually talking about mystery and suspense, we're going to tune in for 24 hours and get our energy drinks, and we've got 5 screens set up and timing and scoring, Andy Blackmore's spotter guide, Radio Le Mans turned up, and, boy, I'm buckling in. This is the first Le Mans I can think of in I don't know how long, mate, where the actual question of who was going to win was essentially the most anticlimactic part of the race. Did you have any sense of that, and do you think I'm out on an island there?
I don't think you are, but I think there's good reasons for it. And the 2 good reasons for it are, number one, that 2 or 3 of those operators actually got a bit of a break with a bit of fortune, with early safety car and caution periods just helping them where they were on the track to get them an edge. The bad news for everybody behind them was they happened to be the ones with real speed already. So the Pink Pig, the number 77 Proton, and the 26 G-Drive car were all very quick. And what was noticeable about all 3 of them was that once they got that break, they couldn't be caught. So in the case of the LMP2 car, and you pick a very good example, G-Drive were just plain quick. Roman Rusinov was quick. Andrea Pizzitola, the Super Silver, was very quick. And Jean-Eric Vergne was just stellar. So we saw the likes of Nico Lapierre really try to put up a massive hunt down of the leader, and they couldn't make an impact. In fact, they were dropping back. So the bad news, if you like, about that suspense, and I think you're absolutely right, is that the gods of this particular race had decided, let's give these guys an edge and see if anybody can catch them. Because the other aspect of it was that it's been a long time since I've seen 4 early leaders like that, 3 early leaders, we'll come back to LMP1 I know in some detail later, 3 early leaders be absolutely faultless. And that was the other story here, is that what made it, I'm not going to say it was boring because it wasn't, what made it as static at the front as it was at the front of this race, the cars in the lead battles, generally speaking, were absolutely ironclad solid. That means that, when the Panis Barthez car was trying to chase down, and Will Stevens did a great job in the Ligier, putting that Ligier where a lot of people thought it probably couldn't go, that ultimately that car fell by the wayside, but was quick enough probably to edge closer in the standings. Yes, we were left, particularly in GTE, to be cheering on just amazing battles, but it was just a little further down the field, and 4th down to 12th in line astern for about 40 minutes, for instance, was one of the things that will stick in my mind. And at that stage in the race, before we were getting into the night time, that's a wonderful thing to see. You're seeing guys really go at it hammer and tongs. And the great thing was that whilst it edged away from each other in the night, by the time we got into the morning on Sunday, those battles came back together again, and they continued where they'd left off. For me, the reality about the overall, though, MP, is we are going to talk about EoT, I'm sure, on this show, and I'm going to be writing a lot about EoT, but the reality is it wouldn't have mattered. It wouldn't have mattered if they got a better break, if you like, because the reality was that neither Toyota faltered, with the exception of Kamui Kobayashi missing the pit and having to go around, for the most part on the full course yellow speed limiter to get enough charge back in the system to get him back at full power from Arnage. In doing so, exceeded the lap limit and was given a penalty as a result of that. But the reality is, aside from that, mechanically and electrically, the Toyotas were perfect, and whatever happened with the OT, they would not have been caught. And by the way, there is one little drama I can share with you that we gathered from the paddock today, which is Rebellion were mighty lucky at the end of that race. The number 3 broke its gearbox on the final lap.
Yeah.
That car would not have finished if that had happened in the lap previously. It would have been another Toyota moment on the final lap. But beyond that, the story for me of the race was drama after drama after drama for this very new and as yet almost entirely unproven LMP1 non-hybrid pack, with shunts, with mechanical, electrical dramas, with all sorts of things being thrown at them. The reality was that the Toyota's competitors melted away all too quickly. And that's a shame, because it did make the ultimate question about LMP1 rather too quickly exactly what I think we've said it would be, which is, will the Toyotas stumble? And it was that within an hour.
Yeah, well, couple little notes there to throw in. I think we might also need to cross the old road here on a first in the Week in Sports Cars podcast. I think we might need to ask for a waiver on BoP and EoT discussion, because we normally limit ourselves to three.
Dear
listener, dear listener, this is the 24 Hours of Le Mans. We're just going to have to ask for one. And we're not going to try and bring it up any more than necessary, but it played such a crucial role in the event as it played out. I don't know if we could stick to 3. So if not, please, we apologize. Let me know what we could do. We'll do push-ups or something. Some sort of act of contrition. Your point about EoT not mattering when it comes to the Toyota's runaway, breakaway performance, I hear you, and I don't entirely disagree, Graham. But I also know that when you have something that is so far out of balance, teams wanting to participate in the non-hybrid portion of LMP1, if you have something that is so drastically wrong in terms of what the ACO and FI stated they would do, right? They stated that with the lack of LMP1 hybrids in the top class, with there only being 2, that they would indeed try and use EoT to an even greater degree to create parity between the 7 non-hybrids and the 2 hybrids. This is separate from the previous awarding of LMP1 non-hybrid trophies and such. I mean, this is getting rid of there being effectively kind of dual awards here. If we look at that statement of, okay, well, the vast majority of LMP1 cars we have coming to Le Mans are non-hybrid. We only have 2 hybrids. We're going to have to really try and balance them so we have something in terms of competition and show. Probably the biggest failure I can recall on their part. And so this isn't trying to be mean. This isn't trying to fire arrows into them. This is just anybody with a pair of eyes and the ability to either measure distance and time, or the ability to read the timing and scoring information would say, this did not work in any way, shape, or form. When it comes to fastest race laps, by the overall winner, the fastest lap in the, again, during the 24-hour, forget qualifying and peak trim, but just race pace, a 3:17.6 by the winning car. The best managed by a non-hybrid was in the 320s, a 320.0.
Correct.
Fourth place. That was the fastest of the 2 Rebellions, a 320.3 by the third place finishing car. I mean, it's just over 24 hours. It's just brutal. Now, obviously, the non-hybrids had every kind of issue from Andre Lauderer completing the first lap without the nose on the car to you name it. So that's why.
Is it worth me actually telling you exactly what happened in that incident? Because we do now know what happened in that incident. And actually, oddly enough, courtesy of Toyota's official photographer standing at turn 1, because I know it looked as if Andre gave the Toyota a hefty thump up the rear. He didn't.
No.
What actually happened was, it looks like the Rebellion team did not secure the nose properly at the beginning of the race. And what happened was, I think there might have been a brush. Andre says no, I think there was a brush with the rear of the Toyota. But clearly, we can see on the photographic evidence that we've got that as the car came into turn 1, this is the number 1 Rebellion, that the front bodywork was already dragging
No,
on the floor.
You could see from the in-car camera, mate, that it actually slid
Absolutely.
off the front of the car. It wasn't.
And actually, what hit the Dragon Speed car was not the Rebellion, but its front bodywork, which flew off.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's that's the first of a couple of, and I'm not, by the way, not disagreeing with a single word you've said. First of a couple of little bits of. In the heat of the race, and when you're trying to catch up, it's very easy to get things let wrong. That was one. I'm sure we'll come on to did Fernando Alonso reverse in pit lane? Answer, no, he didn't, but we'll deal with that one later.
Well, it was the only point I was going to make on the EOT, with it being that far off, any non-hybrid team that had a desire to compete or try and go for an overall win was absolutely required to go flat out 100%, and that was insufficient. So just my only, I guess the point here is, clear. We said ahead of the race, what do we expect in LMP1? The unproven non-hybrids to have a raft of reliability issues, which they did. I can tell you one thing that will exacerbate that and or accelerate those problems, and that is, for me to be competitive, I have to be at 100,000,000,000% to even have a whiff of being less than 2 seconds off from the leading hybrids, and that was not necessarily even possible. So just saying that from a technical regulation standpoint, if you want to make sure that you have a lot of issues with brand new cars, come out with an EOT that disadvantages them so heavily, and we haven't even gotten into the fuel stint length and those items yet. Make them go maximum attack at all times, just to have a hint of being competitive, and that's where you're going to expose all their weaknesses. So, again, I'm not saying that they would not have had problems at a slower pace. Had the Toyotas been dialed back into a realm that was achievable, they still would have been running incredibly hard. But at least the way things were set up through EOT and played out on track, we kind of drove the results to what we have based on that disparity. There was no option, Graham, for any of those cars.
Absolutely
to
agree.
99%. That's
let's put it this way. I think. I mean, again, coming from the paddock, I had a chat with a number of people today about a variety of things. EOT most certainly came up, and for me, there's one thing that can be done and should be done immediately, whatever happens. We'll come to that in a moment. And there's one thing I'd really love to hear. Okay, I should say immediately. I am delighted that Toyota have broken the bogey of the multiple second place finishes. Shouldn't forget, by the way, as I actually said to Toyota yesterday, they've still got second place, but they've just got first as well. But one thing I would love to see from the extremely sporting folks at Toyota Guzzi Racing is that they are the principal lobbyists to actually get EOT changed the remainder of this season. Because you know what? Headlines are all the better if you've got competition. And the one thing that I think can be changed and should be changed immediately is this nonsense of the additional 5 seconds in the pits for the refueling. I know that is supposed to be a message around the fact that Toyota are carrying less fuel, but frankly, it's lost in the melee of the privateer cars falling so rapidly back off the end of the, well, not very long LMP1 train. So that immediately could change, and could change, pretty easily. It is about just a larger fuel fill restrictor on the fueling rig. It is, of course, part of the wider story that I know we're going to get into week after week after week of the current trend for governing bodies in motorsports to put wider and wider controls on every aspect of the competition. I hate it more than words can say, and I reject it. It is not healthy for our sport to have pit stops, stint lengths, fuel load controlled to the nth degree. It's not increasing the entertainment value. It's actually insulting to the intelligence, and it needs to be challenged. It needs to be challenged by literally everybody. From you listening, sitting on the spectator banks and in the grandstands, you're the guys who are actually paying to come in through the gates, to you and IMP as reasonably senior members of the media pack, to the drivers, to the teams, to the manufacturers. It's not good for the product. It is not good for the entertainment value. I think there's a lot of nonsense been spoken about how this makes the racing closer. I think what it does is it reduces it. It doesn't. It just doesn't. I mean, by the way, I should say, it spoke to 3 different
I love a
LMP1
Goodwin rant, by the way. So keep going, brother.
Absolutely, but the 5 seconds extra fueling time in the pits wasn't 5 seconds in reality. It was 7. That's what it took them to get and that I think was principally because Toyota were turning around the car more quickly, because they're really very good at this. And that's the other part that doesn't appear to have been taken into account, is that you've got a very well resourced crew from Toyota and from Orica, remember, because they helped to service that effort. That if you give them a break in terms of time that they're allowed to do various things within, they're going to do it better, because that's what they do. So it's time to take a look at that. The reality is that Toyota are always going to win this if they didn't stumble. They didn't stumble, and I'm delighted that they've got it. I think it's been long overdue. It breaks one of those long time bogeys in sports car racing, and now we can move on. Number one, the cynics that say, well, that'll be it, Toyota will walk away whether or not they win it. No, they won't. Stop it now. They'll be with us into the next regulatory cycle, I have zero doubts. But now Toyota need to show us what they've shown us from the very moment they stepped into the WEC, which is, we value this competition. Let's give them at least a sniff of our tailpipes. That needs to happen, because otherwise the WEC's LMP1 resurrection is going to be something of fool's gold.
So we're going to move on to Fernando Alonso here in a moment.
Was he in the race?
I heard.
I wish
an incredibly positive part of the race, and so
he was, mate. He was a very positive part of the race. I'll have my little rant about that first immediately, and then we're going to move on to the positivity, which is, it was always going to happen, but it did happen, and they deserve a kick up the arse, frankly, for making it happen. Really, guys, in the mainstream media, really, Alonso wins the Le Mans 24 Hours, really, surely we've gone beyond that.
No.
I'm not really that surprised. I'm just, it's what your parents used to say, isn't it? I'm not surprised. I'm disappointed. It's the worst thing you could possibly be told, that your mother was disappointed in you. You go ahead, MP, because there was a lot of positives about Fernando.
Yeah, and we'll get to those in just a minute, but I want to cover off on a few things here. And dear listener, by the way, our format for this show, I wish I could say that it was a highly structured 20 bullet point item where we cross them off and just are, everything is done in a perfectly clean manner. Like the races themselves, especially the 24 Hours of Le Mans, it is a living, moving, breathing thing, and so we tend to kind of follow wherever the threads go. Not always linear, so we apologize if you are indeed looking for linear conversations. Couple of interesting thoughts that occurred to me, Graham. Some of it on the EoT, BoP side. Some of it on the star power side, namely Fernando Alonso, Jenson Button, Juan Pablo Montoya coming in as first-time participants. We had a lot of build-up going into the race. For those, not diehard fans, but for those who maybe had heard about it but hadn't really, were lacking an interest to tune in because it lacked star power, true big names to dive into and embrace, and that's my hook. Fernando Alonso is doing this race, well, cool. Time for me to tune in and see what it's all about. My fear is, based on quite a bit of, again, feedback that I've seen, my own opinions as well, is I think that for those tuning in, drawn in for the first time, or really expressing a larger interest, at least for the first time, because of these bigger names, those who might have tuned in and just wanted to see what kind of race they would get. What is this thing? I know these big names are in it, that's why I'm here, but what is this? Is it fun? Is it engaging? Is there a good fight going on at the head of whatever class? I fear that there might have been a bit of false bill of goods here, in that since there was this large chasm in 3 of the 4 classes in terms of competitiveness, my fear is the takeaway from many was, oh, well, hey, cool. Really cool to see Alonso won. Love that guy, etc., etc. That's amazing. But, yeah, boy, I checked in the first hour and Toyota was leading. And I checked in at about 8 hours in, Toyota was leading. And I checked in and so on and so forth. Or in GT. Ah, yeah, cool, that Porsche, that's awesome. Yeah, Pink Pig, wow, how fun. What is that? Where does that come from? Explanation, understanding the history, great. Okay, and boy, this thing's kind of cemented, it seems like. Porsches were fastest, clearly. There was some good battles that went on between them and Ford, no question. The silly safety car practices, though, baked the GTE Pro result from very early in the race. And yeah, I checked in at 8 o'clock and Porsche Pink Pig was there. And checked in here and Pink Pig was there. One of my fears is we've had the first really great casual bridge for folks to want to tune in and see the race and this form of racing that you and I love so much. And I'm not claiming that this is the effect. I'm just saying it's my fear that for some, whatever percent, might have walked away going, oh, well, I got to see my guy. And I got to see Jensen do some laps in the car after it got fixed and such, and before it blew up, I guess. But just in terms of this being a race, actual who's going to win, I wonder if the newish fans that did bother to tune in might have left going, well, if Fernando's back next year, or Jensen's back, maybe I'll tune in again to see how they're doing, but that wasn't that compelling of a proper motor race to see who would win. So, just again, curious if there might be any fallout from that standpoint. We wouldn't know that today, obviously, but that's definitely a concern. I will say on the Alonso side, Graham, that the numbers tell us that guy's fast. Not a huge surprise. Fernando Alonso is a fast motor racing driver. What we saw was in his car, especially overnight, as many folks have commented while it was happening live and even since then, holy cow, did Fernando Alonso, I guess like Nick Tandy 3 years ago, overnight, overnight in the toughest conditions, boy, did this guy distinguish himself from the rest of the team and do things that elevated any sense of his, whether he belonged or quality, etc. Wow, look at what this guy just did. Just an absolute monster. So, definite, concerns that we might have scared off some folks who were tuning in for the first time and weren't particularly amused by a lack of competition for the overall win, Graham. But at the same time, for those who were tuning in because of Fernando, I think they would have taken away that, yep, this guy is one of the world's 2 or 3 best drivers, period, in anything at any point in time. Let me pose this to you. Any sense of hollowness that you feel with Toyota's win owing to the lack of competition? Or do you feel that they have invested so much over the years that even if they did win without true competition other than themselves, this result's okay?
A sense of hollowness, I know what you mean. I think the answer is no, and that's based on one factor and one factor, or 2 factors. Factor 1 being you can only race the competition that turn up.
Yep. Not their fault. Not their fault that Audi and Porsche pulled out.
And once you've done that, you've got an option to race to a pace that is going to be extremely conservative and just enough, or you deal out a kicking of epic proportions by racing hard and racing entirely clean. Now, there's no doubt in my mind that very, very, very considerable periods of the race they were racing. The recovery back through the field after the second safety car, I think it was, with both Toyotas finding themselves at the back of the longest chain of cars in the world, was epic stuff. I get the point, and I don't necessarily disagree with the point that if you were coming to this on the promise of, Yes, is Fernando Alonso going for another kind of arm of the Triple Crown, and that you saw utter dominance there, that it might not have been the most engaging of shows. Completely get that, but from Toyota's point of view, I'm not sure what else they could have done. I think they, or beyond the fact that obviously there was a little bit of lobbying to make sure that they had as much edge as they possibly could within the rule book. Fernando, I thought, was epic out of the car, and I'll come to why in a moment, and epic in the car, and we all saw that. Epic out of the car because qualifying in particular showed us one aspect of Fernando that perhaps the populist side of the media had not allowed us to see here. They'd love us to believe that it's just a kind of ruthless pursuit of success. Kaz Nakajima set the pole time in that car. Fernando Alonso would not come out the garage without Kaz Nakajima being front and centre. Would not do it. And actually made sure that any member of the media that tried to make him the story on that evening was told reasonably bluntly, if politely, I didn't set the time. And that, I think, shows that this is a man that's ready for this show. He gets it. And I really, really like that aspect of it. I hope that that there might be a kind of hidden aspect here of the part of the show that you very accurately described. It's great having the likes of Juan Pablo Montoya, Jenson Button, and Fernando Alonso, plus a galaxy of supporting stars from all over the rest of motorsport. I think the most star-studded Le Mans we've had in quite a while for people outside the normal cabal of sports car racing. That I hope that plays its part as well in attracting new high-level entrants, and I think it will. If you can get to the stage where current or very recent past real-world superstars can be attracted back to this great race, if that's something that becomes possible for some of those potential factory entrants, whether it be in GT or whether or not it be in whatever LMP1 it is now in the near future and with the new rule set, then that could prove to be one of the really big pluses out of the experience we've had this year. For me, the downside has been this. I think the way in which some aspects of the powers that be around the Le Mans 24 Hours have dealt with specifically the Fernando Alonso story, because it's fair to say making that too much the headline, I think was a little, how can we put this? It was ill-advised. I think it showed a degree of media immaturity on their part, and on the basis that they've not had that level of that sort of story to deal with before. And I think it was just too blunt. That in itself led to some of the more extreme versions of mainstream media interest in the race that, frankly, I think people who love this great race and love this part of the sport found particularly difficult to stomach. The BBC in particular, by the way, an institution which I treasure and I'm delighted to say have long championed in terms of its balance in a sea of dreadful mainstream media, deserve a special place in my personal hell for their one offering before qualifying, which was their Formula One reporter. And it's interesting they don't have a motorsport reporter, but a Formula One reporter. Effectively, his headline was something along the lines of Toyota deny plans to fix the race so that Alonso can win. Great, let's bait the trap before we go even anywhere near the forest, guys. That's not really an acceptable thing for any mainstream media operation to do in a race of this kind of profile and with people of those kind of character involved in it. But I think it was a bit too blunt. I think they will learn some of those lessons, and my guess is the likes of Fernando Alonso will help them to learn those lessons, because I think there'll be dialogue about it.
I don't. I completely disagree. I've seen nothing in the media, mainstream media, that would tell me anything other than latching on to the most basic, widespread appealing items will take place. I mean, I know that I looked at my country's largest general sporting website this morning, actually last night, but also this morning, and Alonso's victory with a image of his Toyota TS050 is slotted under the Formula One category. So, and I'm not just trying to openly criticize for no reason here, but I'm not surprised why those who normally don't care about something and only tune in because they have an obvious hook that appeals to a wide-scale fan would then essentially hitch themselves to that whenever possible and completely ignore, the conventions or norms of honoring the rest of the race. So, I mean, it happens here. I think it happens everywhere. Oh, this widespread appealing thing is there? Well, cool. We're just going to blow that up in perpetuity.
Here's one positive to draw from this. And I don't know the answer to the question, but I'd like to offer my Alonso finished the race. And I'd like to think that was the very loyal band of proud Japanese behind Toyota wanted the man who had the greatest disappointment in Le Mans history just a couple of years ago, wanted to give him the opportunity to basically slay his own personal demons. And it was great to see Kaz Nakajima, such a vital part of that effort, and an absolute delight to see a man who's been in a really positive part of the LMP1 story throughout the hybrid era, getting the opportunity to cross the line as a champion. And that, I thought, was, if you like, the antidote to some of the cynicism and some of the kind of, the celebrity-based, let's use that awful word, celebrity-based dross, to be honest with you, that populates the mainstream media, I'm afraid, not just in motorsport, of course, but just about everywhere else. But I think that the all-star aspect of, for instance, what we've long seen at the Rolex 24 Hours at Daytona has a place at the Le Mans 24 Hours, if only to bring it to a wider audience. And a proportion of that wider audience will like what they see and will stay. And you're right, Marshall, that the aspect of that little analysis that's missing is, was it an engaging enough product this year to make that happen, the numbers that make it worthwhile? And the answer was it wasn't, other than if you concentrated on seeing these astonishing cars doing what they do to traffic, which is basically pummel it into submission, in the way that you might as a marauding Norseman in the north of England back in the day with a very large club. It is one of those experiences that we've come to be used to over the last more than half a decade, and there's only two cars to do that.
Yeah, I think the overriding concern, that I've expressed coming out of this race, it's not one of trying to look too heavily focused on a single event and say, oh my goodness, it wasn't magnificent, therefore the sky is falling. Not the case at all. My friend and colleague Robin Miller wrote a column last week, an opinion piece after the Texas IndyCar race, which was a rather boring affair in terms of winners and losers, who was going to win, who was going to lose. Effectively, the center, the origins of sport, competition played out over whatever time, in whatever construct, a track, an arena, a court, a pitch, for a certain amount of time, with a certain amount of players or actors involved, with the sport itself being waged to arrive at a winner and a loser. There are lots of great subplots that go on with every sport imaginable, but ultimately sports are played to achieve winners and losers. And looking at what we had last weekend, that wasn't really much of a factor. What Robin wrote about was on the topic of a couple of snoozers in terms of IndyCar ovals. Indy 500 itself also not one of its finest examples on the topic of true competition at the front of the field, et cetera, et cetera. Robin's piece was saying, look, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, we had IndyCar races where guys would win by 2 laps. It would be just, the actual essence of who was fighting for the win. Boy, that was a foregone conclusion. So, take it easy, dial it down, everybody. Not every race needs to be an all-time memorable event. And I don't disagree with that sentiment, Graham. But I do think, I do think that there's something critical to add on, though, and that is, we also didn't have smartphones in our hands to look down at every 5 seconds to keep us amused. The minute we feel just the first iota of boredom, or our mind wanders a little bit, we go down to our phone. We pull up something to keep our adrenaline going, our mind active. We didn't have those things back then. So naturally, actually getting up and going to an event and watching it, that was a pretty amazing thing. You want a great fight up front, but even if you didn't have it, there were no other distractions. So what you had in front of you was truly celebrated as whatever it is or isn't, I'm here. I'm going to be all in, more or less. My fear, which I think needs to be noted, is we no longer live in those times. So we now do have a bit of a dynamic where every major event, even minor events, seem to be scrutinized for their entertainment value.
Absolutely.
And so that, again, that's driving most of what I've mentioned about this race not being as much as we'd hoped it would be the first year, minus Porsche and LMP1, and knowing that there was going to have to be some serious work done, Graham, within the technical side of things to make things compelling and fun. So, again, I'm just hoping we didn't turn off folks, because...
Well, you know what? Everything you said is completely correct. Here's the good news. If they choose to do it, there are two things they can do tomorrow, they can do tomorrow. The question of whether or not the Toyota performance advantage has to be reeled in. We've not at all spoken about whether or not the Toyota's performance advantage has to be dealt with by them actually performing less well. There are two things they could do tomorrow that would make a fundamental difference. A fundamental difference. It might not put them onto the same lap times, but it would certainly seem less unfair. Number one is they could change the regulation about the fuel fill restrictor and even out those pit stops. Because you know what? Come what may, Toyota are going to turn their cars around quicker anyway because they're a better team. It's as simple as that. Number one. Number two is they could bin this ridiculousness of putting the fuel in so that there was a lap advantage for the Toyota. I get it that the message has to be that the hybrid powertrain is more efficient than the non-hybrid powertrain. But that's pretty easy. And remember, I'm one of the commentators on this, WEC. All you have to do is to keep reminding the viewers that you're doing the same distance but with a hell of a lot less fuel. Yeah. It's very simple. You don't need that falsehood that it is, if we know it's an option, if they are using something like 50% of the fuel. So let's do that first. Let's give us, at least in terms of distance and at least in terms of the time spent on pit lane, a level playing field. Then you get down to the pure performance of the cars. And that's a whole different question. Is there much more in the tank for the non-hybrid cars? At the moment, I don't think there is, because I think they're all very new. I think they're all still exploring what they can get out of that package. I think they'll improve in terms of performance. They will certainly improve in terms of reliability. But before we even get to that question, let's do those first two things. Let's do that first, because what's been readily apparent from the Le Mans 24 Hours, and for that matter, the 6 hours of Spa-Francorchamps, is that those two things just add to the problem.
Let's wrap up with a couple of other detail items about the race, more from a procedural standpoint, but also a philosophical standpoint, and then dive into questions, because I know that a lot of the questions that have come in, Graham, would be items that we might also just discuss on our own. So that might be a good entry point there. Let's talk about slow zones and pace cars. I once again come away from Le Mans, owing to the track length itself, Graham, seeing slow zones as being a valuable construct, but also specifically at Le Mans, questioning the lack of finer usage of slow zone implementation, meaning when we had somewhat late in the race with the grate coming up at Tête Rouge, which required some quick fixing there. The solution was, after the track workers moved away and it was in place and the cement was trying to cure and whatnot, a slow zone was implemented through there to ensure that folks did not run over that. Okay, great. the fact that those drivers passed that section, that the slow zone started just prior to it, and drivers then had to wander effectively all the way down to and through the first chicane at 80 kph. Again, I understand the concept of localized slow zones, but when we get an extreme version like this, where the slowing area is at the very beginning of something, and we then have to watch this painful march after it's been passed, well after it's been passed, and such a long piece of road to be navigated on the the pit speed limiter, there's a part of me that wonders, is there a more dynamic slow zone construct that can be implemented? What is there something that can be done either through control in within the series itself to activate or deactivate or alert teams that in 5 seconds a counting down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 to come off of pit speed limiters, that rather than having cars just march for 90% of a slow zone past the problem, we could actually get them back to racing.
I think the answer is the answer is that yes, you can always fine-tune something. But remember, slow zones are a remarkably recent addition to this great race, and for that matter, to endurance racing. And that's come because we've got better access to technology like properly accurate GPS systems that allow race control to keep an eye on these things. Better radio systems, for instance. Digital radio's made a huge difference to the ability to actually marshal these kinds of matter. But before that, you were really looking at the only available option was very much a more full course caution aspect to it. Many more safety cars in the past. And now what I know, certainly Le Mans, Eduardo and the team and the marshals look to do is to keep the disruption to the race as localized as possible. And it tends to be, you're right, the issue is not what happens about controlling the incidents. Right. It's what you do in terms of, I guess, how contained can you make that zone, correct? And clearly what they're trying to do is to give people the opportunity to slow down safely, to get down to that, and also that they've got prior notice that the slow zone is going to come to an end in a controlled manner, not with a green flag as soon as the last bit of carbon fibre has been spotted on the track, but within a reasonable time after that, so the cars that can get themselves sorted out in line astern or whatever it is, and then wham, you then go for it. It's a very good question. Those slow zones, what we see on the screens, of course, is really talking multiple marshal posts along what is probably, for a single incident, 4, 5 marshal post lengths before we can get to the stage where the rest of the track actually goes green. One thing I will say, though, MP, is it's remarkably successful in terms of getting the incidents dealt with quickly. Because that's the other aspect of this, which is, is you get the field under control remarkably fast, and you therefore give a safer working environment for the guys to get stuck into this. We saw it, didn't we, with what became multiple incidents with Matevus Isakian, a man who's had, it has to be said, a dramatic introduction to LMP1 in the races so far, where, fantastic efforts to try to get the number 17 S&P Racing PR1, to see that his efforts were not rewarded by anything other than, the AER engine expiring in one of the most spectacular fashions I've ever seen a power plant go. Clearly, it lost cooling. I don't know if you saw that incident, by the way, overnight, MP.
No, but, I saw the end result, but I did not see the lead up to it.
I would love any one of our listeners to drop a line in on the Facebook page or drop me a private message, whatever you like, to explain to me what we were seeing. I understand that the car was effectively losing its water in a literal cloud of steam. The thing looked like a steam engine. But what I don't understand are the flecks of light, orange light we saw around the engine block as it expired. It looked like fire, but it wasn't. So I don't quite understand what we're seeing. I've never seen that before on any race car. So please, if anybody understands what I'm talking about and actually understands the answer to the question, I'd be really grateful for any input you've got on that one, because I simply didn't understand. Beyond that, though, it is a fair question. They are constantly looking at ways to kind of blend those two often conflicting concepts. Safety around any incident on track and not losing the entertainment value of the race as a whole. And I know that at times those two interests can conflict. I've been party to discussions where they've conflicted, but there is very active work going on. I think we've got to the stage where your question has partly been answered by the introduction of the slow zone in the first place, over and above what otherwise would have been a full course caution or a safety car. Now what we're getting through to is there the possibility of a debate about whether or not that concept can be refined so that we can condense that zone any further? I think it's a perfectly fair question.
And again, I'm trying to... That question was posed mostly from the perspective of if you were sitting at home watching the race and you have seen that cars have cleared the area in question, and yet they're continuing at this ridiculously slow speed, and it's being shown on television over and over again, and you start shouting, and I might be hinting that I was the one shouting, "Go!" And they can't, because again, per the rules, they have to, but again, it's just this... just again, trying from a refinement standpoint, I think there could be something there. Let's crack open the last topic between you and I, Graham, and then move to questions, because we have a lot of questions coming in from our dear listeners. Pace car implementation, multiple pace cars put out. I believe we also had in at least one instance I can recall where we had both a pace car and a slow zone. We saw the same old thing happen. It's happened in the past. Races have been won and lost based on when or where a particular car is picked up by the safety car. We saw early in the race, first couple of hours, situation with the pace car deployment and the race winning, what turned out to be the race winning number 92 Porsche. Was, I believe, the only GTE Pro picked up in the first safety car group, and the remainder were effectively picked up in the second group. And from there, a one-lap lead was created. That one-lap lead was never surrendered. And again, I'm not talking about pit stop exchanges. I'm just talking, while all cars are on track racing competitively. There was a one-lap lead that was built over the Sister 91 entry, was held throughout the race. There was some great dueling that went on between the 91 and the third place finishing 68 Ford GT that finished almost 27 seconds behind that Porsche. But we had another instance, Graham, where massive advantage and massive disadvantage. I don't know if ruined is the way to put it. Ruined the race for the overall win in GTE Pro, but early on, just simple, either luck, fate, whatever, settled this race. And it was down to, as we mentioned early on, it was down to the 92 to either fail or crash for anyone else to have a shot at winning. That didn't happen, and we ultimately look back to this pace car scenario to say that is the thing that created the advantage, which was never surrendered. That had nothing to do with the 92's decision or choosing. I get that folks say, well, the track's 8.5 miles long, we can't have a single pace car. Why? Why can't we? We lead the race with a single pace car. We go to green with the field trailing behind a single pace car. Why can't we? Or, flip side, Graham, why can't we go to, instead of pace cars, a full circuit slow zone? And I know I don't like the idea of that, but what I dislike even more is that random track placement can dictate winners and losers with this multi-car pace car scenario that we've seen play out yet again. So, am I getting drilled too far down, complaining at the minutia? Do you think that there's further refinement possible here? What comes to mind?
I think the answer is that it's all possible. I think what's been very positive in the last not very many years is the ability shown by a number of major race organisers to learn good lessons from perhaps some more minor race organisers. And I think if there's an opportunity to actually learn and see, and it's always great, isn't it, when there's an example you can point to that shows where something designed with all good intentions had an unforeseen effect.
Yeah.
And in this instance, there's some very obvious examples. You just quoted those that, effectively in a couple of the classes, a huge opportunity was offered and taken, and unwittingly, to take a big advantage that because the teams, plural, thereafter ran, with no delay, proved to be a major deciding factor. The fact that, to be honest with you, the GTE Pro leading team and the LMP2 leading team happened to be amongst the quickest in any case, which is what put them there in the first place, just made that prospect for the purposes of first competition worse. And I'd like to think that there are those whose role it is to take a look and say, what could we have done to avoid that possibility? What could we have done? I like to believe that that's the case. I do believe that's the case. I know there is interaction between those whose principal role is safety and those whose principal role is the show. I know that to be the case in the case of Le Mans and the WEC. And pretty clearly, safety usually wins that argument. But in this instance, it's a slightly different argument, isn't it? It's what can you do to manage the transition back? And I know that it's something that IMSA have grappled with and come up with the difference between a short and a longer full course yellow, for instance, because, as someone who obviously attends and watches a lot of North American racing, that's been a source of massive frustration to me, is how long that process gets to go back to yellow when you have to go through the pit stop routine, particularly on courses that are far shorter than the Circuit de la Sarthe. But I think it is a fluid thing. I think criticism, when constructive, can be extremely constructive, is often listened to, and you know what? Sometimes they go away and think about it and think, actually, they've got a point. I've debated these things with very senior officials in a lot of the series that we've had an involvement with, and sometimes might take a little bit of time to do it. Something comes back in a season or two that can make a difference. Sometimes they'll come up with some answers to questions we haven't even asked. Things like the changes to the pit stop regulations in the FIWC, which I'm told is to do with the show. I happen to think it's just wrong. It's just taken away a huge part of it, and that, by the way, is going to be a long-term thread until such time as somebody changes it, because I don't want anybody ruining my race like that by taking the variables out of it, by taking the opportunity for teams to show just how all-round awesome they are at the jobs that they do, by putting on some kind of multiple and overlapping false parameters for the length of time it takes you to do this or the amount of that you can carry. That, to me, it's got no place at this level in sports car racing. There are no advantages drawn from that, and if the advantage you draw from that is that you have, 2 or 3 families with a family pack of Cheetos sit on the couch being marginally more entertained, it's not a price I am prepared to pay.
Yeah, I mentioned in something I started noodling on for an opinion piece that this looks like Le Mans has taken a page from NASCAR and its introduction last year of stage racing. Their fear that at 500 miles and no guarantee that there would be cautions or something to pack the field up, that their race could become boring. And so what they've done since then at every single event is to implement stages, mandatory stages that run a certain length. Then there is a yellow flag thrown, then all the cars pit, and we effectively start over. And they hand out points at the end of each stage, so they want to make sure that folks aren't just racing towards the finish, but racing to try and earn championship points at all phases of every event. And so it's been an effort to try and create some semblance of excitement where I don't know if it was needed, and I don't know, at least if we look at the fact that NASCAR, every number they have, be it attendance, television ratings, etc., is in decline, that it has done anything to improve the show. When I first saw that Le Mans, the ACO would be implementing the maximum stint length. My first reaction was, you are taking away a variable that would allow a team to have some options to play, right? If we cannot beat you an outright pace, is there something we can do in our pit strategy, fuel strategy? Is my driver better at conserving fuel than anyone else in his or her class? Maybe that is something where we can go an extra lap per stint. Again, picking out some options here. Or timing of a yellow comes, timing of a safety car, or whatever comes, and based on what we've been doing with fuel conservation, we could get in and out of the pits faster than anyone because we only need half a tank, maybe compared to the full tank anyone else would need. Variables, options. It's something dynamic where the teams themselves can insert themselves, strategists and so on. And to me, this was just a stripping of that layer. This is something that just, again, took away, in theory, you were going to have a lot of race strategists unemployed when we come back next year, because I think most teams went in with one and probably went away going, well, we love you, Fred, but we don't have much need for you because this thing has been painted into such a narrow box. So that, again, to me, it was very NASCAR. Like, okay, what's an area we can completely regulate that hasn't been regulated before, possibly in the name of entertainment, but since we're now talking about the race as it played out, I can't see where it improved the show. Possibly the ACO and WC did see something that they found encouraging or met their objectives, but this, to me, again, on the topic of, we're not swearing off the race. We're just saying that, boy, were there a lot of areas for discussing that could be improved for next year. This, I think, is among the leading items. And granted, mate, we spoke about this more than once in our Day at Le Mans podcast well before the race took place, that this is painting folks into this narrow box just seems like the antithesis of what endurance racing happens to be. So for me, I'm happy to see it was what we thought it would be, and now hopefully they'll take away and remove for next year's race.
It's very simple. There are three questions that you need to ask of the people that make those decisions. Why did you do it? Okay. What has it added? And what has it taken away? And from the answers to those three questions, you get really to a very good position to decide whether or not actually it's been worth the effort in doing it in the first place. And my view is just get rid of it. I mean, really, I didn't agree with the reasoning for the introduction of the new pit lane regulations. When you were explaining the stage rules in NASCAR, not a series I follow in any way, shape or form, imagine me wrinkling my nose like a young rabbit in disgust at it. It's so false. It's that like kind of fan boost in Formula E. I'd rather eat stones. I'd rather stick pins in my eyes than, it's just stop. We're intelligent human beings. We are aware of what it is that we find entertaining about motorsport without somebody having to guide me through it as if I'm, a wayward child that needs one of those straps that parents drag them through department stores with. No, I get it. You're looking for new audiences, but please don't throw away the audiences you've already got, because you know what? Those audiences are awesome. They should be your advocates. Start working on what it is that you can do to activate the audience you've got to persuade other people. Start offering them incentive to bring somebody with them. Start finding ways, because these are the people asking the questions of us, MP, cheering on the teams from the tribunes at Le Mans and in the stands and the infield at Daytona. Start finding ways to make it easy for them to bring their friends with them. Start actually finding a way to find the people who come back year after year after year to your track, to your race, and give them a free ticket to give to somebody else. Do that thing. Build your audience. Use the ambassadors you've already got, because they are the thousands of people who pay every year, whether or not it's for a TV package or whether or not it's a ticket on a turnstile, to come and hang on that fence and watch these heroes go by. That's what you should be doing, not tinkering with the rules that brought them there in the first place.
Amen to that. All right, we're going to get to questions here. Before we do, going to summarize a little bit. If you're a fan of Toyota, awesome race. If you're a fan of Fernando Alonso specifically coming into this event, awesome race. If you are a fan of Porsche, could not have gone better in both classes, but specifically having the two tribute liveried Manti cars finish 1-2, I would say also rather amazing. If you are a BMW fan, clearly the end result was less than savory, but the fact that the cars were highly competitive as the race started to transition more towards darkness, the fact that the BMWs did show pace, I thought that was very encouraging. I would say if you're a fan, and you would have to be a weird person, but we love you because sports car racing tends to be a collection of the weird like ourselves. If you're a particular fan of the Oreca concern, then you probably loved LMP2 with a 1, 2, 3, 4 finish. I realize that the Alpine branded Oreca finished second, but you could call it the Goodwin, and it would still be an Oreca beneath, or an Oreca nose to stern. If you were a fan of Ligier and LMP2, you were probably a little bit dispirited to see that the proverbial joker that was allowed during the off-season was insufficient. We saw that at the test day. We saw that through practice and qualifying. We saw it throughout the race. As I wrote, I think, on Road and Track, a deficiency seen Wednesday and Thursday was not going to change drastically in the race in any shape unless there was a BoP adjustment. We did have BoP adjustment, Graham, so there was a slight uptick for some, but not enough to change the realities of anything that we saw in practice and qualifying. If you were a fan of the non-hybrids, I would say that you're going to continue to follow the WEC to look for their full potential to be realized. I also kind of sort of loved the fact, mate, that the less heralded of the two Rebellion entries was the one that finished on the podium. And that, look, I love all the more heralded drivers, Johnny, Senna, Lauderer, in the number one entry. But I'm definitely digging that the one that did not look like it was going to be a standout did actually come home first among those cars. We'll also mention that if you were a fan of Aston Martin, you were disappointed in both GT classes, but particularly in GTE Pro, where the early Friday evening BoP adjustment that came out, that did help the Aston Martin Vantage AMR brand new car a little bit. Still had it performing as if it was in GTE AM, and yeah, so I don't know if the ACO believed that they were hiding performance and therefore they weren't going to give them much of a break because that would unleash the car's true potential. If I am Aston Martin, I am truly wondering how they were left in such a sorry state for their debut race, knowing that BMW counter in the debut race at Le Mans for the M8 GTE was indeed quick like a bunny after or once it got into the race. So, couple of take homes there, mate. I don't know if any of that is earth shattering. The Corvettes, I know from an American standpoint, Ollie Gavin in the 64 Corvette C7R had a bit of a suspension issue, which knocked him out of contention early, and afterwards I could be blanking or forgetting, but I don't seem to recall its sister car, the number 63, being overly competitive. They finished 2 laps down in the end. 1 lap down to say the non-pace car advantaged race-winning entry. Ferrari, I think, had bouts of competitiveness, but pretty clear that anything that did not have a wailing flat 6 in the back of it was going to have any real chance of winning there. But let's move on to questions, because again, I know we could probably drill down into every single entry and further into GTE AM, but there's just a bigger part of me that says we need to get to fans' questions because there's a lot more fun stuff to dive into there. So with that said, questions. Oh, we get questions. Let's see. Where should we start? Jordan Darwin. Any chance Le Mans would consider removing any chicanes in the future? Rolling back the clock on sections of the track would be awesome. I don't disagree, Jordan.
Answer is no. I'll be honest with you. No, the reality is we are where we are, and we are where we are because, to be blunt, if we weren't where we now are, the speeds along the Hunaudière would be by now be so stratospheric. Think of the level of progress that we've made in just about every other endeavour in sports car racing. You give the geniuses that have come up with the cars over the last 10 years the opportunity to use that as the defining factor of how they generate lap time at the Le Mans 24 hours in this day and age, and you're going to be at truly terrifying speeds. It was done for safety. I think it was done correctly for safety at the point in time when aerodynamics effectively overtook engine power as how you generate this lap time. And I actually don't think in this day and age that they're anything other than part of the entertainment. It tends to be where we actually see a fair amount of overtaking action. Yeah, it tends to be where we see some drama as well in the braking and acceleration zones. And with the car's abilities in now and the kind of getting towards the middle of the 21st century, but I think we can start calling it pretty soon. I think it plays to their strengths. So I think the answer is we won't see it. And the answer is I don't think we should.
We would answer the EoT question in LMP1, though, because if we did not have the chicanes, we know that the approximate 1,000 horsepower that the Toyotas have to exploit, well, they shed approximately 500 of that horsepower through hybrid deployment
they do.
Heading down, and then that is not recovered until they break again. So if we wanted to see the LMP1 non-hybrids go sailing by the LMP1 hybrids on the Mulsanne and pulling out some form of advantage, that might be the ticket, mate, because trust me, it would be crazy impressive to see what the LMP1 hybrids could do from an elapsed time coming out of Tête Rouge, right? We know that they would ramp up to peak speed faster than anything else, but then they would run out of steam, whereas the higher horsepower non-hybrids would actually have that power the full distance. So that could be fun, but they would never do it.
Well, if the listeners don't know it, the reality is you could do it very easily because actually the original track is still part of the public road. The chicanes are not public road. They are actually boundaried off for the remainder of the year. They're the part of they're one of the sections of the track that is effectively not open to traffic. So it would be pretty simple to do it, even if only in a demonstration. It'd be interesting to simulate it, wouldn't it?
It would. David Ogburn has a question, which might be, I can give general thoughts, but since I wasn't on the ground, you're probably the best person to answer this. He says, is there a difference between the Manthey and core Porsche GTE Pro cars? And to that, David, no, those are same 911 RSR models. But are there differences other than the teams and drivers? Wasn't sure if I missed the cars being a different spec or something like that. He says the gap in pace seemed larger than I would expect with the wheelmen that core has. At least looking at some of the averaging of laps and fastest lap speeds between drivers, I was surprised to see a number of the core folks lower down on that register than the Manthey by quite a margin. So, any thoughts there, Graham?
Well, other than the Manthey crew have got more experience at Le Mans, and Le Mans is a unique track. Now, I don't know. I simply don't know what level of data sharing there was. I don't know. But I would expect there to be pretty considerable data sharing there. It was effectively a four-car Porsche effort. But the reality is, pound for pound, person for person, the Manthey Porsche squad have more people with more experience of a track which is entirely unique. It might have been that.
Let's move on to John Sable. John always sends in great questions. We might have answered this in entirety, but maybe we haven't. Maybe they're further to throw in. Apparently, Le Mans has a lot of rules. What rules would you keep, and which would you eliminate? So we've already crossed that on pit requirements, stint length, and whatnot. We've already gotten into, I don't know if this is a rule so much, John, but possibly refining the management of both pace cars and slow zone lengths. Anything else jump out as let's get rid of that. That's silly.
I have a philosophy in life that where you go wrong with systems is you start with a common sense system, because nobody does something that's just been stupid for no good reason, and then things go wrong and you add something, and then something else goes wrong and you add something, and something else happens. You think, I hadn't thought of that, so you do something to prevent either the opportunity to get around the rule, or to prevent someone from doing something stupid or taking advantage unfairly. What you generally end up with, and this is not just exclusive to motorsport, I think this is about just about everything else, which is what people tend not to do is then to look at that evolving structure, takes two steps that actually makes sense anymore. And all too often what you find, whether or not it's to do with public policy or sports, is that you've got things that all of a sudden lose their initial shape. That's where I think we are with Le Mans now, and this ludicrously complex and descriptive, proscriptive rather, rule sets that I think is developing. It's just right. It doesn't make sense to me. I think what my friends in the rule-making bodies now need to do is take a step away from it, look at actually in the real world what's happened here, and make a decision based on not whether or not they're actually responding to an individual instance of, trying to deal with an individual issue, but whether or not the whole thing makes sense anymore. And my rule of thumb is this. Rule of thumb is that if you can't explain it adequately within 30 seconds, that you shouldn't be doing it, because we're dealing here with ultimately sport and entertainment, and that's that either you as a rule maker, you as someone actually marketing that to to try to join your team in selling that, you as somebody who's trying to get sponsorship to come to that race, you as a journalist and a storyteller, you as someone who's employed by a TV station, a radio station, or indeed by the championship or the race itself to explain it to the wider audience. If you can't do it in 30 seconds, you've lost them. So you apply what we call the elevator pitch rule, which is if you've got that guy you're trying to get $500,000 out of in an elevator by himself without the attack dog that actually guards the office, or indeed the suits who surround him, if you got him in the time it takes you to get up 3, 4, 5 floors in that building, can you sell him your idea? Can you pitch him that in the elevator? It's exactly the rule I think that should apply here. If you can't sell it, don't do it.
Unfortunately, you've also just mentioned a mindset that would put a lot of us out of work, because a lot of what we do is explain things that can't be explained in 30 seconds or less. So, all right, we'll be extinct, but fans will indeed be more tuned in than ever. Let's see. Our man, Andrew Baca. The EoT and LMP1 was nowhere close to the ACO's target. Who deserves what share of the blame and or responsibility to fix it? The privateers, ? The ACO, ? Do we even care? Because the Rebellion cars had more issues and would have finished behind anyways. Personally, I don't like that the privateers were given a fuel reduction after Spa. To Graham's point, the ACO's choice not to explain the adjustment breeds cynicism. Well, Andrew, you might have heard, I've gotten into this a fair bit. This is something that we mention more often than we really want to on our show, but in any racing construct where the sanctioning body says we are going to implement a balancing system, they then take full responsibility for the product of what is put on track. And I realize that there is the ability for teams / manufacturers to hide, to try and undersell their pace in order to spring one on the series and show up in the race and to run faster. We've seen in IMSA where they've implemented a policy and enforced a policy that says if you perform outside the expected performance envelope, you're going to come visit us on pit lane and sit, and that's our mechanism to make sure that you don't get one by us. It's a weird, strange, unfortunate thing where in those series where they take control, trying to balance, when's the last time we walked away from a major endurance race, whether it's WEC, ACO, IMSA, and said, man, they did a wonderful job. Boy, seems like the cars and all the classes where BoP or EoT is implemented, they really got it right. We usually say that about one class, maybe two. Rarely are we able to say that about all three or all four, depending on how many classes there are. So there's always something that's off. And I just think that as long as we have such things in place, we absolutely know who to blame. The people who, effectively, this is the police saying, this is a new law, and we are going to enforce it. And then when you see it's only being partially enforced, or the enforcement is only partially effective, you are just subject to the reality of what takes place. And sometimes it's like the race that we just saw, which was GT class being imbalanced, and most dynamically, LMP1 being not even a competition, just a question as to whether the leading cars would break. So, I don't know. This is what they created. We have seen that there is a ongoing issue with maintaining the accuracy of such things. So, to me, you either love the racing and just try and ignore this as much as possible, or you continue to get frustrated and stay in a place of frustration. Well, dear friends, we just took about a 45-minute break that you might not have known about in final editing, but while discussing your questions, dear Graham Goodwin received an email informing him that
the LMP2 winner had been excluded, and the fourth place car for that matter. So drama again. Not the first time we've had Stewart's decisions today. We had some earlier this morning to do with laps deleted for various drive time infringements. Didn't affect any of the podium sitting cars, but did affect the 67 WEC Ford, all to do with drivers not having completed the allocated hours. Or in one case, Francois Perrodo did too much. Well, Francois Perrodo is going to be the victim of two further decisions, one of which is a reprimand for the skid plank being overworn, but far, far more dramatically, his fourth place 28 TDS Racing, and as I say, the 26 G Drive racing car, both operated by TDS Racing, both disqualified from the race for, and it's a complicated one, MP, for effectively TDS Racing having interpreted the regulations to do the fuel rig, have inserted an additional part, I believe, into the dead man's handle, which effectively defeats stricter. And I think the net result of that, you've been taking a look at pit stop times, is
faster. Oh, they went faster. They went faster on almost every stop. So let's do this. Let's work backwards, mate. So now, until possible further disqualification for who knows what, the number 36. 36. Hey, as
36.
I mentioned, I create new words here all the time. The number 36. Signatech Alpine Matmut, Alpine A470 Gibson, better known as an Oreca 07, the new class winner. If we look at the lap time, the pit durations, I'll just read off a couple of here to give you a sample. The very first, 1 minute 8 seconds. Their 10th stop, 1 minute 10 seconds. Their, let's see, how about their 16th stop, 1 minute 9 seconds. Their 23rd stop, 1 minute 11 seconds. Now let's go up to the...
They're broadly similar, aren't they?
There might even be an average we could come up with here. Now let's move to the once class-winning number 26 G Drive Racing Oreca 07 Gibson. First stop, 1 minute 1 second. 10th stop, 1 minute 4 seconds. Let's see, 18th stop, 1 minute 3 seconds. 25th stop, ooh, okay, 1 minute 13. But by and large, the average lap time, the average time pit in to pit out being measured by the WEC 1 minute 5, 4, 5, 3, 3, 3, 6, 3, 3, 2. And there are some others that are a little bit longer, 112. There are random 109s, 110s. Don't know the exact reasons for those. Could be a driver change, could be whatever. But for the most part, we were mentioning minimums 9s and 10s for what is now the winning entry, and there are far too many, Graham, with the former class-winning car that were 5, 6, 7, 8 seconds faster per stop.
Well, let's make it clear what advantage they draw from that. It's about 6 to 8 seconds by my broad brush reckoning. That is somewhere way over a lap advantage taken from that. Now, we should make it clear, a defence has been levelled by TDS Racing. They admit they have inserted a part into what I believe is a dead man's handle. Their defence is along the lines of, the regulations don't specifically exclude as madding parts. It tells you what parts you have to have, but it doesn't say that you can't add parts. That's been discussed and debated and rejected under both technical and sporting regulations. At the moment, yes, they can appeal. So guess what? The results are still provisional. There's an additional issue here, MP. We spent the first part of the show talking about additional, rather taxing regulations. Now, the problem is, this is exactly the kind of thing which means we're going to get another one.
I hope it's received the opposite, which is, hey, if you want to do things that are outside of the rules, then guess what? You can go through the glory of being hailed as winners one day and losers the other. Flip side to that, to your point, this also does not reflect positively on the organizers of the event. This reminds me a little bit of Justin Wilson's IndyCar win at Texas about 6 years ago or so, 5 or 6 years ago, where there was a very strict series-wide aerodynamic specification that was required. The Texas race took place immediately after the Detroit street race. This is Texas Oval. And Justin's car, I believe it was just truly an error, but there were a couple of aerodynamic pieces, downforce producing pieces, that were on the car at Detroit that were left on for Texas. And Justin not only won that race, but Justin's car went through tech Friday. It probably went through Thursday, then multiple times on Friday, and again on Saturday prior to the race, and those pieces were on the entire time. Now, I realize fully that we're not talking about the vehicle itself going through the ACO's technical inspection. I realize that this is refueling equipment, but in theory, those items are also checked for legality and compliance prior to the race. Within the case of Justin, in a race where the cars were very low downforce, and having those couple of extra little widgets on there added some extra downforce. Not night and day difference, Graham, but enough to where he said, I wonder if those did play a role in his ability to win. I know that the IndyCar Series was mortified to learn that car had gone all the way through technical technical inspections, start to finish, with those items, illegal items on the car, having never been spotted. I was actually asked to share a photo with them. I happened to hold my camera up and take just an overhead photo of the car, first practice session Friday morning at that event. And when they found out that they had missed it multiple times, they wanted photo confirmation as well. And I happened to mention, I got a photo if you want to see it. And they were very upset with themselves for having let that car get through. They did not rescind the win, but I think they docked them points and possibly some sort of monetary fine. I mentioned the story, Graham, because this sounds a little bit like what might be considered here. Obviously, the disqualification with such a massive advantage being generated, I would think, no question there. But there's also the, if you don't want egg on your face, then these are the things that maybe should be under greater scrutiny. We know they're going to tear the cars apart, right? Start to finish, they're going to be absolutely draconian there. But you start to see some of the support equipment getting through. Question as to how tightly those might be regulated. Another thing quickly to mention, Graham, and I didn't see this, you didn't see this, apparently none of us saw this, including the organizers till after the race. this also has to bring us back to 24 Hours of Daytona this January.
Absolutely, 100%.
With the Land Audi R8 in GT Daytona, have similar thing where they were refueling at a much faster rate and spending far less time on pit lane than their rivals. IMSA happened to catch that very early on, and they then levied a, again, fairly harsh penalty to the team. But again, this is not trying to pick at the ACO, but it is strange to note that after this penalty was announced, Graham, after many folks have now written about this, LMP2 winner disqualified. You then pull up the, I'm just simply looking at the FIAWC.alcamelsystems.com timing results, which are free and globally available, and was just curious to pull up the pit stop analysis, and it's staring you right in the face there. So part of me just wonders, or must assume, that there is no mechanism that might have been in place for Eduardo Freitas and company to have the, the proverbial blinking light on one of their screens saying, hey, this is drastically out of compliance with the rest of the cars in this class. Take a look. That, we know, is effectively what caused IMSA to single out the Land Audi, saying, hey, these I keep saying lap times. I wish I knew why. The time spent on pit lane is drastically out of what's expected for this class, and that is what triggered their inspection and the ensuing penalty.
Yeah, and just to give an indication of just how many penalties and decisions we've got, this is decision 69 through 72 so far. So it is frustrating. You really want to walk away from a race with the results that you see being the ones that Andrew indeed spent a lot of time writing about, being the ones that will prevail in the history books. But the reality here is we have a situation where the rule book says one thing, the team says they believe they comply entirely with the rule book, the stewards disagree, there's been an investigation, decision has been made, this team can now appeal. And it's frustrating, but it's the reality. I'm concerned that this will lead to further consequences in terms of what that rule book will say. So a lot of what we've been saying in the early part of the show, MP, I fear this will have a consequence in terms of the rules being even more prescriptive. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, you bad people. All right, well, let's get back to Q&A with a little DQ thrown in the beginning here. And we've got lots of great questions. So let's see how many we can get through before... I guess you would fall asleep first because it's getting to be about 10:30 in...
It is 10:30, yes.
Let's see, where shall we go? Okay. Jerry Siddeth asks... What were the defining moments of this race that will stick with you in the years to come? Maybe not something big, but something you'll remember. Mine was seeing Sebastian Bourdais dice with Fred Makovicky in the number 91 Porsche in the latter stages. The Ford didn't have it, but as usual, Seb fought tooth and nail. By the way, I listened to Radio Le Mans broadcast for the first time, and all I can say is, wow. They set a high bar for racing on the radio. Big memory you think might stick with you in years to come?
Fantastic racing all the way through the order, beyond the lead, of course, as we discussed earlier, in GT Pro. And it just goes to show that, whatever else we think, did the Porsches have a little bit of advantage? They possibly did. But we got 5, 6, 7, 8 car battles, and they were tooth and nail battles for very considerable periods of the race. For me, GT Pro was the battle we hoped it would be. That's the defining moment for me.
I'll go with the obvious, and I guess it will be the bigger one that probably most people remember. And I think for sure, Jerry, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, when I think about Le Mans 2018, it'll be the year that Fernando Alonso won. And knowing that he has expressed an intent to come back to the Indy 500, there's one piece of that Triple Crown puzzle that is missing. So what might be fun, and we'll see if and what happens next year, the year after, but our boy Juan Montoya, who was extremely quick in the United Autosports number 32 Ligier, barring that little off at Indianapolis, if he were to find himself in a plum...
And he's now a podium. And by the way, he's now a podium sitter.
Yes, if he were to find himself in a plum LMP1 seat next year or the year after, we now have an interesting duel between two extremely close friends, two Spanish-speaking folks. So who could or would get to the Triple Crown first? Would it be Fernando getting that Indy 500 win, which I think is actually a little bit more of a crapshoot? Or could it be Montoya if he were to find a way into... it probably wouldn't be a Toyota, seeing as how he was paid to drive for their rival brand Honda/Acura. But
I tell you what, though, wouldn't that be a story? If we actually had Montoya in one Toyota and Alonso in the other?
Yeah, well, again, we'll have to wait and see what happens.
No team orders there.
No, yeah. Come 2020... with the new hypercarish LMP1 style rules that are coming, it'd be quite interesting to see if Honda/Acura would want to put something together for that. I did speak with Honda Performance Development Vice President Steve Erickson on Friday and broached that subject, and he did mention that if that were to happen, if going to Le Mans became a brand goal, it certainly would not be a decision made within his faction, their North American racing arm, or most likely even North American arm of Honda. That would be a Japanese decision, and whether they would contract someone else to build the car and run it, whether they would task HPD, which has built many of its prototypes in the past, not sure, but Steve did say that if we were to see Honda there, which is their global brand, Acura definitely is an American brand offshoot, that might seem a little bit strange for them to use. But if that were to happen, if Montoya is still driving for Roger, and Honda wanted to go to Le Mans, then I could see that happening for sure. But the old, hey, could I drive a Toyota Honda? How's this? If he were able to pull that off, he would be the world's best negotiator. I can tell you that for certain sure. Let's see. Christopher Logan. Well, we're kind of just on this topic. He says, I'm sure this has been covered, but could you give me a summary of the rule changes coming into effect in 2020? As I saw the interview with Zach Brown, who's entertaining the idea of entering a McLaren GT.
Not true.
Yeah, and I guess Christopher, as Graham can probably explain here, we were thinking we were going to get rules. Not locked in stone rules, but at least a fairly sharp direction. And it still feels like we got broad strokes, Graham. And does it feel to you like, heck, 3 months from now, 6 months from now, what we heard on the press conference Friday could still change?
Well, okay. First things first, let's talk about the rules, regulations, etc. We didn't get regulations. We got a bit more than broad brush, and on a bit of investigation, there were 2 or 3 areas. I think 1 or 2 minor ones, one maybe a bit more meaty. Most are a bit about technical detail, and my guess would be that one of them is to do with the terms on which mandated commercial availability of hybrid systems to privateers from manufacturers might be one of them, cost capping effectively, that they are looking to present the regulations for approval by the FIA, because they have to be, at the end of this year. There is an FIA World Motorsport Council meeting in December. That's when I believe they're going for it. That's the first one. On the subject to McLaren, I said not true because Zach wasn't talking about a GT car. I think we have been pretty close to I know we've been very close to a GTE program for McLaren for whatever reason. And my guess is it might be a little bit of internal politics here to do with ambition for the brand. I think a lot of people saw the Senna GTR car that was unveiled in Daytona and wondered why it was that a road to track car, a hypercar effectively for the track, needed position lights on the side. Well, you can fill in the little blanks for yourselves there. What Zach is talking about, and I know this because we spoke to him, is whether or not the McLaren brand might be seen in the new hypercar look, but very firmly LMP based LMP1 or alternative replacement from 2020 or the 2021 Le Mans 24 Hours. So McLaren are undertaking an evaluation. His timeline, reported by Stephen Kilby on DSC and on Racer, indicates they will be ready to make a decision at around the same time as we hope and expect regulations to appear at the end of this year.
And there you go. Let's see. We even got a question from Andy Blackmore, or a comment. But
we got to go that one. No, we got to go. Yeah, we got to go with Andy. By the way, thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Andy. I mean, yet again, knocked it out of the park with the Spotter's Guide. Massively helpful when you've got tired eyes in a commentary booth or in a press room. And I know a lot of other people think the same. And we'll say this much, by the way. I did actually notice something, despite the fact that the FIWC have their own, I think, inferior product on the Spotter's Guide front. If you looked carefully in the commentary booth, you saw a couple of shots from the commentary booth of their official feed, they had your Spotter's Guide in it.
Yeah, I sent him a couple of screen caps of that, so I know that made him happy. Let's see. Well, let's go, because we've covered a couple of the ones leading up to Andy's.
Well, I mean, he says it is more of a comment than a question, but can you try to convey how much effort it takes to finish Le Mans, let alone win it? The negativity on social media about to having it easy is annoying me as much as BoP. He feels any win by any team is a huge achievement, regardless. To finish first out to finish, something many other brands have failed to do over the years. Cough, cough, Nissan, cough, cough, Aston Martin overall. Fair point, actually. I'll say this much. Toyota have been trying to win this thing for longer than I've been going to Le Mans, and that's quite a long time. I think something like 20 years, more than 20 years actually, 30 years they've been trying to actually, that's depressing, trying to win Le Mans. And this has been a very big deal for them. Very many brands tried, maybe tried again, and then gave up and didn't come back. Toyota have kept coming back. They've respected this race throughout. That's just the broad brush of general history. Let's talk about the WEC years, 2012. 2012, make no mistake, we had a WEC because Toyota stepped up from what should have been a development on a racing year to fill the void from Le Mans onwards that was left by Peugeot bailing out at the very last moment. We owe them that loyalty. Beyond the point where they, have played either a dominating role as they did in 14 or a bit part role once Porsche came in at times, to effectively cash in on the massive investment they've made over more than half a decade in this sport. Why should their opportunity to activate that R&D, which is exactly what they've said all along, why should it be removed from them because somebody else in another corporate body has made another decision? That's not fair. It's as not fair. In fact, it's a lot more not fair than people are implying that these rules have been to the LMP1 privateers. There is a balancing couple of factors to do with it here. The LMP1 privateers this year had breaks to their performance before all the nonsense started that persuaded them to come back in. They are lighter. They have more fuel. They effectively were in a position where, were they to run untroubled, and none of them did, that they would have a chance to win the race overall for the first time if one factory team messed up. That's something we've not been able to say in WC history. So that what effectively the LMP1 privateers were gambling on was that Toyota would have a race that was not perfect. That didn't happen. Therefore, any debate about the rest of the performance and the equalisation of it, I'm afraid, just lies fallow because Toyota produced the goods. And for that, you've got to congratulate them. There's a lot of very lovely, highly professional people at Toyota, and it was a delight to see them, that absolutely enormous weight lifted off their shoulders.
And I am in complete agreement. I think they deserve our full respect. I'll also bring in something that I mentioned earlier in terms of the LMP non-hybrids, where we said, boy, with the performance disparity, they had to just push like mad to even have a hope of having a decent finish. How's this? I don't think there is any real question or any valid question, Graham, as to whether both Toyotas were running at their maximum pace. I didn't see anything that hinted at them dialing things back or going for a partial attack. I can say, obviously, last year was a bit of a cluster for all the hybrids with, routine or multiple mechanical issues, electronic issues, you name it, damage that led us to nearly have an LMP2 overall winner. But we did see the effects of one big P1 hybrid team pushing the other, and both crumbled under the weight. Porsche ended up being the benefactor of that. We saw the year before Toyota pushing like mad within a lap of winning and the car failing. But again, call it a performance under duress, because they had a manufacturer capable of pushing them to their limits. We believe that they were running to their limits this year, but we also can say without Porsche, Audi, whomever there, we don't know, they didn't have a rabbit to chase. So again, I'm not taking anything away. I'm just, wanting to insert, we do need to acknowledge that in the absence of another rival to push them as hard as possible and possibly lead to mechanical, electrical, whatever failures on behalf of both brands, there is a little bit of assumption that they went as hard as they could and won as a result. So nothing to take away from them, but of course you say, well, if you're in a class of your own, if you are one of one, then some of the variables that can come in during a race and some of the adversity that one might have to overcome, were you pushed to a place where that might have happened. So that's the only thing for me. Where again, leaving this event, I say amazing, wonderful. They were flawless, more or less the entire time. But without someone to push them, there is a question of would the result have changed if they were under fire for all 24 hours? We don't know. We can only speculate. Let's see. I'm going to move up a little bit because I'm not going to rant on this. I'll give myself less than 60 seconds to respond, but I missed another question from John Sable. Your favorite part of the Eurosport coverage? Hashtag or slash sarcasm. John, the question you've raised, I did start a hashtag during the race, hashtag TV Le Mans 24 Gems, and I'll just say that I know that there are some fans, because I have seen the tweets and such from those who defended it and enjoyed it thoroughly. I can just tell you that as one who was brand new to the experience, maybe other than our pal Tom Christensen, who was a part of it, it cemented what I've been saying all week long, in that if you speak English and you are watching the 24 Hours of Le Mans, RadioLeMans.com is truly the one and only place to have an informed event. And again, I knew that beforehand. Was curious to see if and what Velocity's offerings through its new partnership, uninterrupted broadcast of the race, by the way. First time we've had that in North America in many years, Graham. Wasn't sure what we'd be getting through the native Eurosport feed, and I could say a lot of words here on this topic, but I will just maybe leave this in the very succinct manner of, until Fox takes it over again and puts that same broadcast crew together. Not saying I would be a part of that, but the one that folks have seen and heard for many years, or folks just automatically default to Radio Le Mans. That is absolutely 100% what I found out would need to happen for consuming any further races, with that media entity chosen as the folks to deliver analysis and commentary. So let's move on. My friend, where shall we go next among our questions?
Let's have a quick look. Matthew Guy Rich. I know Matthew Guy. I know this gentleman from the Le Mans Series pit crews of old. Much has been said about some of the rules and regulations. For instance, new pit stop regs take away much of the drama of randomisation of the race. Do you actually see the ACO taking stock and making the improvements that are needed to make the sport the great spectacle it was? It seems they've gone backwards. I know we've covered this. The brief thing I'd say is I do think they are open if they get the feedback from the people that they value their feedback from, which tends to be fans in great numbers and the teams and manufacturers, that they are open to be persuaded. So all I'd say to you is this. If you are using social media, and you clearly all are because you're responding on a social media platform, address them directly. Do address them directly. The WC have Twitter feeds. Gerard Neveu has a Twitter feed. Pierre Fionn has a Twitter feed. Don't barrage them with insults, but do let them know what you think. Think hard before you use those characters. Choose your words well, and direct them with due respect, due politeness. But by all means, social media is there for you to use as well. And if you want to direct them to the people that are making those decisions, you should feel free to do so. Politeness, I think, as well as directness, is the key here.
Go F yourself, Goodwin. Let's see. I'll follow this up quickly. Enrique Brand says, I'm glad Velocity aired the entire race. Eurosport wasn't what he envisioned. He said if the call came out to have a dedicated commentary of U.S.-based people, who would I choose? I'm just going off of the folks that I know and have been impressed by. Bob Varsha, he was the absolute captain of the ship. Calvin Fish, phenomenal job in insights. Justin Bell brings a lot of flavor and color, as does Tommy Kendall. I would say that Jamie Howe, one of the hardest, most complete pit reporters I have come across, and with her either in the commentary booth or on pit lane, just phenomenal. So that's one of the great things, Enrique, is there was no lack of talent on the Fox broadcasts, and I would say that after this year's experiment, my assumption is there will be some calls internally to inquire if they could maybe ship some of the names you mentioned or I mentioned over to be part of the broadcast next year. I think, again, if you're speaking to a fairly large and important nation and or region in the FIA WEC's plans, that having the utmost quality there would be not a bad thing. Andrew Langham says, will we see the major, again, good Lord. I need to get some sleep, and I wasn't even at Le Mans, Graham. Will we see the Manor Genetics at the next round, or is their future still uncertain?
Well, I think the answer is that they are certainly trying to get the Managenetas there. Certainly with signs of some fiscal recovery for the cars. Brought one home, which was excellent news for the team. It has to be said that, of course, not without dramas for both of the cars. The number 6 car retiring in the night when electrical woes finally got the better of it. The number 5 car, after mammoth feat by drivers and in no small part the pit crews, finally came home as a classified finisher, albeit it was one of 4 cars that got a penalty this morning for Leo Rissell not having fulfilled his driver hours, so it finishes the last classified finisher. But I think we're waiting for final points on this, rather remarkably, because the points we received after the race didn't seem to make very much sense and have not been explained, but I'm expecting some revised points. Remarkably, the TRSM Ginetta team sits third in the manufacturer in the teams championship, but by dint of actually being the way those points work, by the way, is that every team I think that enters 2 cars can enter, in which case there are 4 entrants in it, and the points are scored for the teams championship by the best finishing of their 2 cars. Now, obviously, Toyota had a car finish. 2 cars finish, so the number 8 car scores points there. The Rebellion team finished with both cars. Number 3 car scores the points there, and the Ginetta finished, and with it being a 150% points score here, then that actually scores them pretty well. So we'll wait and see. At the moment, the points I received in draft said they got 1 point. Now, that's absolutely fine because effectively they just completed the race and were way down the field. But in class, that's not correct. Let's wait and see what comes out of it. But I hope the answer is yes. We'll say a couple of things about that package. Ridiculously quick through the Porsche curves, where the Toyotas traditionally are not that strong. Faster As Mike Simpson said, I thought brilliant quote from Mike on, I think it was on Radio Le Mans overnight, which he said, well, look, I'm looking at the times and I'm quicker through the Porsche curves in the car than Fernando Alonso is. I shouldn't be able to do that. I'm a bloke from Hull with 2 children. It's neatly put. Remember as well that those cars did not run with their optimum Le Mans enhanced bodywork kit because, frankly, it just wasn't ready. They were just really running very hard to just move forward in short steps. So I think there's only going to be improvement there. I was extremely encouraged that the cars started so strongly. Alex Brundle, I think, after the first lap, was up to 5th overall, albeit briefly. But will we see them at Silverstone? It's the home race. I sincerely hope so. I know they've got high hopes of finding a customer for the 3rd car that they've actually got. Let's wait and see. But I thought it was a magnificent effort from a team that many people didn't expect to get beyond hour 2. Those cars, MP, by the way, had never run more than 2 hours. In fact, Lawrence Tomlinson, in the middle of the night when I had a quick coffee with him, told me that they'd never fueled the car twice, finished 24 hours, albeit with a lot of garage time.
Yes. I'm going to take a couple here, mate, and we'll see how close we are to speeding towards our own finish line. David Zitterbart, friend from Australia, says, hey guys, just wondering if Graham has had any sleep. No, he's actually 4 days into the stint. Ha ha ha. Actual question, are the changes made to the Porsche curves leading to more changes in the future? Perhaps some remodeling of the Ford chicanes? And are you guys surprised as I am with the lack of penalties regarding the track extensions and drivers going far out on the exit of the Porsche curves? I have to admit, David, I know that the comments from many fans that I read said they're tired of hearing the repetitive drone of warnings over exceeding track limits. And if you wanted, what you could consider as the absolute perfect visual example, there were a couple of times where I think I saw one of the Fords go so far out on the exit of the Porsche curves that had that car stopped at its farthest point, you might have been able to fit 2 to possibly 3, the entire Ford squad next to it, leading up to the edge of the track. Like, you could have done a photo of the entire team off track at the Porsche curves with how far it went out. Yeah, that one's an interesting thing, but as you might have noticed, David, it doesn't matter where the WEC races. Track limits is just a constant bugaboo of theirs. So I think that's just a style thing. As for
no, I can explain a bit better. I've had a conversation with Eduardo Freitas about exactly this issue, and Eduardo's view is this, simply expressed, and this is more or less exactly the words he used, which is the track limits are defined. The defences around the course at each point are defined not just by the physical limitations of the ground you've got to play with, but by effectively the exit speeds and the cornering speeds you expect to encounter. That's why they've changed the exit to the Porsche curves in the way that they have. If you exceed those limits, you are potentially, therefore, exceeding the speeds that have been engineered to be dealt with. So you're penalised because effectively you're countering against the precautions that have been put in place to effectively save you from yourself. So that's part of the logic that he's used. The other part of the question...
Great explanation. That makes zero sense, but I appreciate his offering that.
I suspect it doesn't apply to every single corner, and we were talking about a couple of specific ones that sit rather earlier in the Le Mans course. It was from some years back. The other part of the question, by the way, was, are we expecting any further track changes? Nothing programmed as far as I'm aware. There are major changes expected in the next 2 to 3 years in the pits complex, extending backwards and upwards, and changes in terms of what's going to happen in the ACO building opposite. But track changes, I think we're now at the end of the current program. I'll say this, though. Had they not made those changes, there were 2 or 3 extremely scary moments that would have been far more violent had those changes not been made. Yes, there is the question, are people taking liberties. I think you and I were talking off earlier about Johnny Molan appearing on Radio Le Mans overnight and putting in a great stint, by the way, talking about exactly this issue. And, if you've got an opportunity to listen back to that broadcast, I'd heartily recommend it to you. But yes, whenever you give people room to take liberties with, quite often professional racing drivers will do exactly that. But having had things go wrong, at least 2 cars had major offs there where it looked as if it had been a failure rather than a liberty taken. The defences put in place at that point, I believe, saved the car and possibly the driver. It is a scary, scary place to get it wrong. And we've seen some enormous accidents that, frankly, I've been amazed that the driver has been able to walk away from previously. I don't want there to be one there where we don't see that occurring.
I'm going to rattle through 3 here rather quickly, mate, and then hand off to you for a couple. Buddy Campbell, 2 parts. What area takes up the biggest chunk of the projected $30 million cost per season / development for the 2020 rules? And why can't IMSA keep DPI rules and do like DTM / Super GT and have a standard tub that the manufacturers then build bodywork around? Buddy, I'll throw, again, I'm just trying to use knowledge that I have gained in another area that might be parallel here. When IndyCar allowed manufacturer-specific aero kits. This is when Chevy and Honda, well, granted, they've been the only brands involved in IndyCar since 2013, but once that door opened in 2014, 15, I believe, heard rumors, more than rumors, to be honest, that each brand was spending at minimum $10 million per year. I've heard that number crept up in the 15, possibly more, 1 year. Strictly on aerodynamic development. So this was coming up with the shape of the bodywork and then brutal amounts of wind tunnel time, CFD time, the people to staff all of this, model makers, 3D manufacturing, just big, big, big dollars to try and cheat the wind. We know that as part of what was explained on Friday in the press conference was they wanted to effectively neuter the concept of aero being the driving factor. I interpreted that not so much as aerodynamics, but downforce and the big use of downforce and clawing every little, fraction of downforce that can be had. That's great. That also doesn't change the fact that these are vehicles that will have shapes, and those shapes will need to be as optimal as possible by the folks who will be manufacturing these cars. If these are true manufacturers, auto manufacturers that are playing, you can assume that a huge amount of money, a huge portion of that $30 million, projected $30 million, will be spent on aero optimization. Even if it isn't big downforce generating things, it will be trying to make the car more drag friendly than the others, for example. So you can say that that would be a huge part. Then there's the engine side. We believe the hybrid systems will be more or less off the shelf. There are questions as to how those off-the-shelf systems would work with bespoke ECUs and whatever things that might be, again, we don't know what they're going to do. If it's going to be a spec engine control system, data system and such, we don't know how those things would interact. But then again, just the basic engine side, what type of power plant would be used? Is it based off of something else that exists, or would truly bespoke engines be allowed? There's another huge expense to be had. Other thing, buddy, is this is a projection of $30 million. Unless there's some sort of cost cap, which I don't know how you would enforce, there's nothing stopping a brand from spending 60 or 100 or whatever number that they want, and trying to pulverize those who are, truly stuck in that rough $30 million per year area. But we're talking aero, we're talking engine to get the car off the ground. Then we're also talking travel and logistics if we are looking at the WEC. We're looking at consumables in IMSA, knowing that we do a lot of long racing over here, a 24-hour plus a 12, plus a 10, and a 6, and then the other events as well. So among all those things, that's where the money is going to get spent, if not more. As for the common tub, I'm sure they could, buddy, but, again, I don't know. Anytime folks say, hey, couldn't a series remove its unique and individual aspects and go to something spec, My heart kind of dies. That to me should be the last resort, not an open question. I'm going to go to Sean Robig next. He says, questions first, then comments. And we'll get to this. Sean wrote a good one here, so we'll get as far as we can. He says, why does ACO-FIA continue to insist that commuter car hybrid technology must remain in the top class? Why couldn't these efforts be limited to Garage 56 or a dedicated class focused on an economy prize rather than outright wins? I think I've been saying this for many years, Sean, largely about the WEC. And also the 24 Hours of Le Mans before the WC's creation. Graham, I love the fact, and I think many of us in the media and even fans triumph and promote the fact that at Le Mans, the event itself was used by manufacturers to innovate. The seatbelt was first used here. The rear view mirror was first used there. And again, I'm not saying limited to Le Mans, but major racing events throughout history have been used as places where auto manufacturers can come and try new ideas that in some cases, not all, those have gone on to become industry standards on every road car we buy today. I have not understood why this attachment to hybrids has just become part and parcel, knowing that Scott Atherton, IMSA president, told me over the weekend, by 2022, one of the reasons that IMSA says, hey, we're going to go in this hybrid route, we should, because it's going to be the industry standard by then. You effectively aren't going to be able to buy a road car without some sort of hybrid assistance. And I hear him, and that may be the case, but I then am drawn back to your point, Sean. We're not innovating. We're just copying the auto industry and making something, that has become common on the road, now a common part of racing. I don't see how that attracts anyone by this stage, however many years down the road. I did maybe when it was something that few manufacturers had in their road vehicles, and Le Mans was doing something unique. But if we're not going to have these 1,200 horsepower monsters with half of that or more being delivered by the hybrid systems that we once did when we get to this 2020 destination, Sean, if big hybrid power is not going to be the thing we're after, and it's just going to be an off-the-shelf thing that everybody uses, I start to think of it like oil. I start to think of it like shift paddles or drink bottles. If everybody has it in the class, and it's required, and it's off the shelf, I don't know how you promote that as being unique. So the bigger portion, bigger point, whatever happened to, got an idea, come and bring it here, see if it'll work. And not just Garage 56, we're going to open one garage for someone to do something interesting, Graham, but if you got ideas, come here and play, and if it works, you win. If it doesn't, you blow up and embarrass yourself. We've written that out as well.
I got a bit of a crack at this one as well. Number one, I'm not buying the commuter car technology thing. I sat in a hybrid this weekend. It was a Porsche Panamera, and John Hindhaugh was driving it, and he loves it. Loved it. It was his chariot to get to the Le Mans 24 Hours this year. That is one mighty, mighty quick car. The LaFerrari, the McLaren P1. We've moved on from that, and actually, where the innovation comes with hybrid is what you do within that boundary. It's things like getting double the power and energy from the same weight and size of battery pack. It's about the less fuel less and less fuel you need year on year. It's about helping those road car manufacturers to progress that, as you're quite right, MP, what is becoming a more standard technology. And I think then you get into the commercial realism of it. The WEC and the ACO have taken a bloody nose from the manufacturers because there's a cheap alternative to showing that their green has been offered in Formula E. Okay, simple as that. They know that they've got to show some kind of relevance. They haven't got time, nor is the relevant budget available to go down the road of innovation, as you quite rightly say, MP, should be where they're heading. For that, we're going to have to wait for a first shot at something like 2024, when they have already announced that they'll be looking towards the zero-emission formula to join it. The problem at the moment is The clock is running. It runs extremely quickly in the industry at the moment, and no one is in a hurry to form an orderly queue to join LMP1 and spend huge budgets without there being a business case to do so. They're working on it. For now, we're in a holding pattern for the next couple of years, a position where they can get the manufacturers back, they believe, with their new concept in 2020, 2021. And while they're doing that, start to talk to those very same manufacturers and others about what their future technological pathway might be. I'm not as cynical as most. I think that's pretty clear to most of our listeners. It's not because I'm out there kissing ass. It's not. It's because actually this is the real world. Real world in IMSA is very different from the real world in the WEC, and for all sorts of very good reasons. I don't go down the road of taking every, pill of sweetness that we're offered on either side by either of those governing bodies. There are things that are said in private conversation that I won't write down because I think, frankly, they're BS around these things. But I do think we've got two governing bodies, one of whom, at the moment, has found a sweet spot. I hope that sweet spot gets even sweeter for IMSA. The other one of which has had a real struggle in the last 12 months, has come out punching, has come back with something that is worthy right now, is coming back with something that is more worthy again in a couple of seasons' time. I think they deserve our respect, and I think they deserve our support. If hybrid is what they're being told in those technical working groups is achievable within the budgets and is popular with the people who are going to put the real world money down, I think we've got to respect that.
Yeah, and I can't disagree with any of that, Graham. I mean, Sean, I'll throw one other thing here before we move on to the next question. The height of interestingosity, another word I just made up, in LMP1 hybrid in recent years was early in the hybrid classifications. We had three completely different approaches. We had Porsche and their battery-based system. We had Toyota and their supercapacitor-based system, and Audi started off with their flywheel-based system. Also know that they were spending outrageous sums, and we know, again, there are all the other the negatives that come from that, the eventual collapse, costs being too high, Audi with Dieselgate. I mean, there's a lot of things. We can't just strictly blame costs for the reason. Had Volkswagen not suffered the Dieselgate issue, would the diesel Audi still be running? I think that we could make a fair argument that might be the case, but I was thoroughly intrigued, and I hope others were as well, when we had a hybrid formula where three teams were trying three completely different items. And then even if we look back to 2015 and they didn't function in the race, I understand that, but Nissan with their mechanical systems from Toro Track, I mean, that's four unique approaches to the same problem. I would say all of them innovative, not all of them successful, but all of them innovative in some way. Question, Graham, again, not so much a question needing an answer, but the question here was, is racing truly improving the breed? Can we say that what's happening at Le Mans will filter back to road car improvement? If we look at this specific example, we could say that the Nissan one was it was just for racing. That wasn't something that they're going to be bolting into Leafs and other things. But if we look at the other three, we had a quick.
I think yes. Yeah.
We had a quick migration, though, mate, to where battery-based became the standard across all three of those cars.
Because it was the best solution, and that in itself is proving that you're absolutely right. We had those diverse powertrain choices, but what we found out, and what they found out very quickly, was that actually the progress that could be made, the curve as it went vertical, they couldn't follow. They had to go with effectively what was then proven to be the correct route. And that, realistically, we haven't got road cars with flywheel hybrids. We haven't got the supercapacitor, and for good reason, because the technology that's been developed through the background R&D we don't see, and through the things we've seen in the LMP1 and in other kind of areas of development, has been proven to be the one where you can progress that technology the fastest. I sort of agree with you, but I really don't agree on this front. I think the technology has improved the breed. It's progressed things like battery technology far quicker than other traditional avenues could have done. Why? Because you are putting it into an incredibly extreme environment and proving it through failure. You're basically pushing it to a point where it's failing, finding out why that failure actually happened, and going back under the pressure provided by competition to try again with a different or adapted or enhanced solution. I mean, yeah, the numbers through the Porsche 919 program are phenomenal in terms of, forget the fact they won what they won, forget the fact that the car was just a steamroller. Look at what they achieved with that technology. It is still very young technology. And, going back to the previous question, do I object to the community car? I do object to that, because actually it is becoming more and more something that if I was going to go out there now and put down, in UK terms, my 25, 30, 40,000 pounds that it takes for even something kind of vaguely decent, that there's now a hybrid alternative to most of those cars. And for the most part, that hybrid tends to be marketed on one or both of the above. Yes, economy, but two, performance. And that is what you need to change people's minds, that not everybody wants to be someone who knits their own yogurt, and wears some kind of Peruvian waistcoat. People want to be seen as someone who's a little bit more cutting edge, tech aware, and actually the performance matters. That's why a race program with something that stands to make a bit of a difference in terms of the impact that we make on the planet makes good sense to manufacturers.
What the hell's wrong with Peruvian waistcoats, Goodwin? Good Lord, shots fired.
Now I've seen your webcam and I'm worried.
Well, let's wrap on this, unless we can keep it going if you want. We did end up proving Sean's point, though, because in the end, all three manufacturers came back to battery-based hybrids. And unless I am being absent-minded on what the absolute vast majority, if not every manufacturer, uses on the road cars, it's battery-based hybrids. So the technology that is already and was already standard for those using hybrids, it was awesome to see three brands go to Le Mans, develop three different routes, and then all ultimately decide the only way to get maximum megajoules, etc., was to go battery. So again, fascinating for me to watch, and other technical-minded folks as well. But the end result was, well, we'll go back to we're going to end up with the racing versions of what we already sell. It wasn't truly, we found something new, or found that the thing we're doing at the track could actually alter something drastically to what we're doing on our road cars. It was, okay, well, what we're doing on our road cars, the form of hybrid technology we already have on our road cars, ended up being the route that they wanted to go in their race cars. So just interesting. Again, I'm the guy who's trying to think of what can we do at the racetrack that might move the auto industry forward. The fact is the auto industry was already where it needed to be on this topic, and the racing models
yes and no. Online. Yes and no. What we ended up with is better versions of that technology. That's the point. It's not just let's replace that tech with a different tech. It's let's move that tech forward. Let's move that tech forward to a position where it is better, to the point where it persuades more customers to adopt it. It is that thing. It's that thing around, if what you've been wedded to your entire life is a V8 motor car, a company moving you to a 4-pot turbo is a big step. If what you've been wedded to is just a normal, an internal combustion engine, and people are trying to move you towards some kind of electrification, making it better, making it perform better, is a good and marketable thing. That's why it makes sense. I'm not saying it makes sense to everybody, and I'm not saying it's everybody's correct solution, but that's why manufacturers were and continue to invest in that as long as it's affordable.
I love this fired up and feisty Graham Goodwin. We got to keep this going here. All right, so we're going to have to trip through a lot of questions here to get to the final ones. We also need to jump over to Twitter and grab a couple there. Graham, do you want to take a look on Twitter while
I'll
grab
do
another
that.
Facebook or two? Let's see. Where should we go? Dan Glass First, I didn't catch any mention of Dan Gurney during the race. Did I just miss it? Not sure where you're based, Dan, but I do know that Eurosport did mention Dan in their honor roll of those who've been lost during the race. I believe it was Saturday evening, U.S. based, and I know that Radio Le Mans did that as well.
We did, because I know we did. At least I bet we did, because I was asked to write the script for it. So I helped the young ladies of Radio Le Mans put that together for John and the on-air crew to add some detail to some of the names they already had, and added a few more names to that. It's the toughest thing of the year.
Dan also says, second, what's with the mandatory stint links? To which I respond, yeah, what's with the mandatory stint links? As Graham has mentioned, with respect and dignity, something that I know you are absolutely filled to the brim with, Dan, those might be great questions to ask Pierre Fillon, who is on Twitter, ACO president, and Gerard Nouveau, WEC president as well. And just further adding to what Graham said, the things that might have bothered you about this year's race that were new, changes in procedure that you thought didn't work, and or existing procedures that you thought could be improved, some of which I've mentioned about pace car and or slow zone usage. These are definitely interesting things to pose to the folks in charge of the series, and sent with the appropriate tone. I'm hoping they would either respond and or take recognition that they have a lot of folks, kind folks, essentially saying, hey, please think about this because it detracted from our enjoyment.
Tone is everything. Tone is important. Communicate. The one thing I'd say to anybody getting involved in a communication with anybody that's in a decision-making process is, don't give them a reason to ignore you. Okay? Don't give them a reason to ignore you. Come across. We see week in, week out in our questions real quality of thought, real quality of debate, really entertaining stuff. Use that energy if you're going to engage with the people that matter in this decision-making process. Tone really matters.
Mark Keekley, I apologize, brother. Your last name is one that's befuddling me. Says, as a fellow Canadian, I'm pretty sure I saw a bear jump out in front of Paul Dalalana. Also possibly saw a moose that was stopping him from continuing on. Was Aston Martin that bad? Watching some of their videos, they seemed very optimistic before the test day. Obviously, there'll be a learning curve, but is it possible that they were nerfed into the ground as well, or just a setup problem that can hopefully be resolved? Again, if we're just
I can tell you about here,
Paul. I was just going to mention Paul seems struck by misfortune at Le Mans. Period. In the GTE Pro side, we've spoken about that quite a few times, haven't we, my friend?
I can tell you this much. It's a delight, by the way, in GTM to see Christian Reed come home with his first win in the 88. But when checking out the team motorhome, I did notice in Christian's motorhome there was what could at first sight have looked like a bear suit. Ooh. Actually was his midnight onesie. So whether or not he was out there somewhere, I could only speculate, but I'm gonna put it out there. Definitely wasn't Christian Reed in a onesie.
Yeah, and let's see. I'll take one more from Facebook, Graham, and then we are going to close out with your choices from the Twitter world. Why don't we go with Stephen Killstonk, a regular person with lots of thoughts in his head that he shares with us. After seeing the Rolex 24 run with little yellow interruption, and then the GTE Pro race was, quote, spoiled by a caution, it got me thinking, BoP is never going to be perfect, and that imperfection in the process gives the car an advantage or penalty that accumulates over long distances. So in the name of parity, it sounds demented to suggest, but should IMSA institute a caution clock? And we have come full circle to our NASCAR reference earlier. Bunch up the field once per hour so the Brand X doesn't run away from the field due to an oversized restrictor. How's this? This almost sounds like, instead of a caution clock, a vomit valve for overeating. Hey, if you just massively overconsume something more than you know you should, more than you know is healthy, maybe you could do that and then every hour just throw up all the bad things that you should not have ingested. This, to me, it's a workaround that effectively admits defeat and places minimal expectation on any sanctioning body, IMSA, ACO, WEC, to hit their targets. So this, to me, is just the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card. Hey, look at that, we screwed up BOP. Well, we're every hour, or whatever the number is, we're going to come up with something artificial to pack up the field and go racing again. Well, I realize there's some variables that could come into play, but if a car is slow, it's going to be slow, and it's going to lose time, and then at the end of that hour, it's going to get packed up in whatever position it was in. It would have fallen back, and then you'll go racing again, and it'll lose more time and fall further back. It might not go down a lap, I don't know, but you're going to end up in a place where whatever car in whatever class is just going to be slow. So, or the one that has been given the almighty restrictor, the big hammer, is just going to run away. So I get what you're getting at, Stephen. It's almost a defeatist's approach, and I don't mean that, I'm not criticizing you, but it's almost, I have that thought every now and then too, like, man, can we ever get this right? Is this just always going to be a thing in BOP series where we're talking after whatever race going, well, they sure had it easy, and boy, those people, I don't know what they did to piss off the technical regulators. It just, the common thing, I would say, Graham, seems to be imperfection is part of the norm, and it's just strange to me to continually ask teams to be perfect, make no mistakes, drivers never to exceed track limits, to never speed on pit lane, to never, where there are just genuine, like, brutal penalties for making the smallest infraction, the minorest of errors, and yet those who are doling out such things are part of a group, not necessarily the race officials, but those who create the rules that are then used to officiate. That team is then allowed to, frankly, make the grandest errors of all with no penalty. So it's just a strange construct.
Well, oddly enough, there's it's not a dissimilar theme to the first one I'm going to pick up from Twitter. It's from Baxter, at Baxter. Hello there. If maximum fuel per stint is a rule, and he thinks it should be, unlike the lap count limit, I do agree, I have to tell you. Why is the penalty such an insignificant 10-second stop and hold? That was a surprise to me too, I should tell you. Shouldn't it be punitive, especially when the alternative in the past was a DNF for running out of fuel in the tank? There's something there, and this is the kind of thought I think that should be presented back to the rule makers. There's another question, by the way, here about, do I think that it was team orders Kamui Kobayashi went? No, I don't. I really don't. I think Kamui just messed up. This is the moment where Kamui Kobayashi was running very slowly on track, effectively told to engage the full course yellow, full course caution speed limiter, until he got to Arnage, where he built up enough hybrid power that he could get back to full power to get the car back to the pits, but that meant he'd exceeded the 11 lap limits, blah, blah, blah. I think for me, false lap limits are just nonsense. It's as simple as that. It doesn't make any sense to me if actually what you're trying to do is to prove efficiency. You should be striving for more. This is back to the earlier point, MP, which is, if you are going to go for one technological solution, then at least try and improve the breed. Don't just standardize everything. So I do agree completely with that. I think absolutely right that it should be a maximum amount of fuel energy per stint, and you do what you can with it. That's where the innovation should be coming from it. One other quick thing on the subject of fuel. It comes from Rick Reducer, Rapid Rick. Rick asks, was this race's fuel specification any different from 2017? He says something about pace cars. I know we covered that earlier. It's not a different specification of fuel, I don't think, but it's a different supplier this year. Shell provided for their final Le Mans 24 Hours last year, and we move now across all ACO racing to Total, who started at the FIWC Prologue this year and will continue supplying to the WC, to ELMS, and to the Asian Le Mans Series under a long-term deal. Final one, And I have to say, Karen Smith, I don't know the answer to this as to when in the race weekend the fuel rigs are actually examined. But there's a further question, which I'm trying to find here, from Lance Snyder at Doctor Who 1975. We know what Lance is doing on a Saturday night. Confirming the disqualification of the G-Drive car and the TDS car too, would the modification of the dead man switch have prevented it from operating properly? Had that handle been released, would fuel have kept on flowing? The fact that that's not mentioned in the steward's investigation, the technical investigation, would lead me to believe that that's not the case, because I'm sure that would have been a defining factor in a very heavy penalty indeed. One thing I can say, though, is if it is in the dead man's switch or anywhere else, of course, in the fuel flow restriction process, had there been a problem with the rig and the fuel had kept flowing, it would have been flowing quicker than otherwise it would have been, now wouldn't it? So either way, whatever they were doing means that there would have been more fuel involved per moment that thing was not actually attached. I've not had a chance to speak to the people concerned. Oddly enough, I did pass them, stop them, and have a quick conversation in the paddock with the guys that were going to be forming part of that investigation about an hour after I saw them. But I know them all well. I think they'll have done it clearly to take advantage. They clearly feel, from the papers we've already seen, MP, that that's actually fair comment and within the rules. The stewards fundamentally disagree with them. Whether or not we'll see an appeal, we'll wait and see.
Yeah, and I can say that I think it was 2 years ago, might have been 3, but I have been on pit lane in a team's garage when the refueling delegation shows up to inspect, and observed it for a good while. I believe it was in the Corvette racing garages, and I can say, Graham, I was impressed by the thoroughness of their inspection and wanting to confirm everything was to their expectations. So, granted, I mean, that was 2 years ago, whatever it was, but I have rarely come across a loosening of technical inspection, so I would assume that this was something that was either just simply missed or possibly an alteration after they came through. I don't know. But we aren't talking about squeaking through, though, right? They were 1.5 seconds faster per pit stop. We're talking about a very big number that any argument that might be made, oops, we didn't know, or I'm not sure, the variance must be on your side, not ours. We don't supply everything for this, so therefore it's on your end. At least looking just purely at the numbers, Graham, there's no real argument to be made that something funny happened. Let me close with just a question here that I missed, and I apologize. This came in from Richard Pontello. It says, Marshall and Graham love the daily updates leading up to the Le Mans race. Gave a sense of the drama behind the scenes, not just on the track. Well, that's mostly thanks to Graham there, who was there. My question is, witnessing Alonso's stints in the Toyota, clawing back all that time during the night, and seeing his camaraderie with teammates after the race, do you believe this erases his reputation as a selfish driver and leads to a better F1 drive for next year, or encourages other sports car teams to chase his services? I think what we...
Sorry, I missed, are we talking about Alonso here?
Yes. I think, Richard, there's often the interpretation of a driver from those at home and those inside the sport, and that's a little bit what this feels like here. I know, having spoken with the Andretti Autosport team at Indianapolis last year, his co-drivers, they were amazed at how selfless he was, how engaged he was, no airs, no attitudes, just 100% about the team. You speak to Zach Brown, who's the boss of the McLaren Racing Formula One team that Fernando drives for. Tell you the same thing. The grumpy things you hear him say, whether a motor has blown up or whatever problem that's happened on track, Graham, often these things are said with a desired effect, not just a pure rant. There are some, but he is wise enough and has done this long enough, I think, to know that when he says something, it's to push a button, to get someone to think, to further drive home a point he's made previously, to create more action, to create a better product altogether. So I'm not trying to make excuses here, Richard, but selfish driver, I mean, if we're talking Formula One, every driver is incredibly selfish. It's just them in the car, and they're trying to beat their teammates. But I think looking at Fernando's efforts here, the fact that he was plugged in, Graham, seemingly loved it, was a part of everything, graceful and whatnot, that absolutely jives with everything I heard last year with him and witnessed at Indy. And have to believe that, I'm hoping there are some manufacturers in the series in a year or two to try and put up a bidding war to get them. That would be awesome.
I'll just add this, okay? We've got a couple of questions, Twitter and Facebook, about the general media coverage. And, and effectively what's being repeated back to us there in that question are some of the descriptors that have been made of Alonso from the F1 media. I've not been very impressed with the F1 media's assessment of this effort. I have been very impressed with two things from Fernando Alonso over the past week. One is his speed, which has been undoubtedly...
He's fast, apparently.
At least as good as, and if not better than, people who've been in that car who've been impressed already and have been doing it for rather longer. That's number one. Number two is, I can only again direct you back to the way he dealt with that big moment when the car had set pole and he wasn't in it, okay? And he was not stepping forward to take any of the limelight. He was the one pushing Kamui Kobayashi. He was the one politely telling journalists that he was not going to comment because he was not in the car. I didn't see any evidence of any of those things this week. Whether or not he's displayed them in the past in the Formula One paddock, I don't know because I'm not there. I would say just this. There are a very small number of cars in the Formula One paddock, and there are exactly the same number of drivers. They are outnumbered by the media pack by, I would guess, something like 10 to 1. And yet all of those people come back and find enough to write about with stories day in, day out, week in, week out, race in, race out. I'm not going to say they make some of that shit up, but the reality is that, of course, when you develop a personality for media consumption, generally speaking, what you then tend to do is to reinforce that. I can tell you this from my past career, working with senior politicians, that I, on a daily basis, would read about many of these people things that were fundamentally untrue, that were not about that not anything like that person, and were done for the effect of one of two things: bias or simply getting that story in the papers. I'm not going to accuse people of that. I can tell you that just about nothing that I've seen ascribed in terms of a negative attitude towards Alonso has been replicated in my experience of him so far, both at Daytona and at the Le Mans 24 Hours, both of which are events where he is forced into a position where there is far more access to him than you would normally get in a Formula One Grand Prix. So that's as much as I can give you. I'm not at home to negativity about Fernando in terms of his application to the task, in terms of the way that he's gone about his public duties, if you like, at those two race meetings. And I'm certainly not going to take my guidance from anybody in the Formula One pack who, frankly, I'm afraid, have shown in their attitude to this effort that the bubble, I'm afraid, around Formula One is still very thick and very full of very thin and very hot air.
I'll just close with this little addition to that, Graham. And this is just on a personal note, and I'm not trying to just foist things towards Fernando to make folks like him if you don't, but I'm just, again, sharing personal interactions. When Justin Wilson died in 2015, he was among the first people to reach out and say, how can I help? They definitely, he and Justin were close from their minority days, and while their careers had gone in different directions shortly thereafter, he was among the first to reach out, and through McLaren offered a signed fire suit, a helmet, you name it, some items that were that went for more money than anything else in the first big auction. And when I did my Graham Rahal, by the way, put that together. A lot of folks helped, but Graham was one who put that together. Last year, when I put together my Wilson Children's Fund donation project, usually run IndyCar, because that's obviously where Justin was racing primarily. Did 3 different prints, Graham. One of them was the Field of 33, which is a start shot I took of the 500. Andy Blackmore, thankfully, did artwork around it, and I printed off about a dozen of those with every driver's name on them, Fernando being one of them, signed by, all the prints signed by Fernando there, plus a lot of others. But specifically, I did 2 extra prints of Fernando to commemorate his Indy 500 debut. And so we had one, which was a shot that I took head-on of him in the car, just a nice shot of him there. Another one was an action shot. So just mentioning numbers, so there were a dozen of the big Field of 33s that got printed. I think I did 12 more each of the 2 Alonso shots. This is a guy who gets bombarded for autograph requests all the time. I ended up printing a total of 36 items that he needed to sign. He was in instantly. The McLaren team was phenomenal, invaluable in making this happen. But here's a guy who, he doesn't know me. I mean, we might, say hello in passing, but it's not as if, we're friends. But this is a guy that in a situation where he can do something, whether it's giving his personal belongings away or just spend the time, more time than you might think, to try and sign 36 individual pieces in the middle of a Formula One weekend. Guy jumped right to it, was all over it, more than happy to help, retweeted, help promote and such, and a lot of money was raised. So that guy, for me, is pure gold, because I've seen that outside the race car, he is a stand-up human being who is more than happy to help in an instance where help is needed. And then also, as we've seen, I think Graham, both in his American Open wheel foray last year and now in his sports car racing foray this year, whatever negative reputations he might have carried beforehand or opinions folks might have had, I'm hoping folks are getting to see at this stage of his life and career. It's a pretty cool guy.
Completely agree. And my final words on it is this. It doesn't just apply to Fernando. It can apply to Jenson Button, who, by the way, was absolute prince this week. Was absolutely lovely with everybody I saw him interact with. Juan Pablo Montoya, another man that, Juan Pablo very well. He was excellent with the public, and judge them on their own behaviour. Judge them on the behaviour. If you do get a chance to actually come and say hello, come and say hello. If you want to ask them a question, try not to make it the same question everybody else has asked, because sometimes that's where people can get a little bit snappy, and sometimes, let's face it, that's where the journalists get the quotes they'll actually like to get rather than the one they're going to get.
Graham Goodwin, it's time for you to go to bed. It's almost midnight, silly man. You're pulling your own 24 hours of Goodwin here.
We are, and we're off back to the UK tomorrow. Looking forward to getting home, seeing the good lady, the lovely Trudy, sleeping in my own bed for the first time in a couple of weeks, and having the close company of at least 1 and possibly 2 ginger and white cats.
Good man. Graham Goodwin, thank you, my friend. Stellar work by you and the dailysportscar.com team all week in Le Mans, extending back to the test day and whatnot. So thank you. This has been the Week in Sports Cars on the Marshall Pruett Podcast, presented by Cooper Tires.